Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, 2026 SANS CTI Survey Insights, From Indicators to Insights, How CTI Empowers Both Practitioners and Decision Makers, sponsored by Broadcom, Dataminer, ESET Cybersecurity, Flare, Intel 471, SOC Radar, and Wiz. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Rebekah and Andreas.
Thanks, Carol. Are we giving everyone a few minutes to hop in still?
You're ready to go.
All right. Do we have our slides up?
The slides are up. There's a tab at the top of Zoom that likely...
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
Myself.
It's early over here on the Pacific Coast. So all those of you joining us, welcome. We are really happy to have you. Andreas and I have been working on this survey together for a few years. And I've been working on it for, I think, going on 7 or 8 years. One of my favorite things is always just to see the evolution of the CTI industry over time. And this year we're excited because there are some pretty significant changes that we've seen for the survey. And we're happy to share that with you. My name's Rebekah Brown. I am one of the co-authors of SANS Forensics 578. And also co-author of Intelligence-Driven Incident Response. I'm a senior researcher at the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto, where I get to focus on the intersection of digital security and human rights. And I'll pass it over to Andreas to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Rebekah. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Andreas Sfakianakis. Been in the CTI world like 12 years or 15 years or something like this. I'm currently based in Greece, in Europe. I'm working as a technical director for the proactive services and the threat advisor service of Unit 42 in Palo Alto. I'm a SaaS instructor for the course that Rebekah has co-authored, 4578, and I am co-author of SANS for 478, the new class that we have for Cyber Threat Intelligence Foundations, which we have the beta version next week. So last year we do this survey analysis with Rebekah. More than happy to share the insights and the learnings, the findings, and the trends that we observed this year. So thank you very much for attending.
And we are very grateful to be joined by all of our different guest speakers from our survey sponsors who are also going to share their insights from both the survey and what they're seeing across the industry. Andreas and I will kick things off by going over our findings, and then we will pass it over to our guest speakers, and then that will be followed by some panel discussions. So throughout the presentation, hopefully you have some questions. We're going to share some of our insights that we found to be most significant and interesting, but we know that everyone has different things they take away or different questions they have or different things they want to discuss that might be relevant maybe to their organization or to trends that you've been seeing as well. So please use Zoom's Q&A window to submit any questions either for Andreas and I or for our presenters. We should have plenty of time, especially within those panel discussions, to really dive into some of the questions. And with that, we're going to kick things off and go over some of our insights from this year's SANS CTI survey. So one of the most interesting things for me from this year's survey was finding that CTI really has arrived. It is now a critical component of a lot of security programs. A decade ago, I think when people first started talking about how to leverage cyber threat intelligence in organizations, large and small, there was a lot of debate around, well, what does it mean? How will it be used? How can it actually help support these security programs? And what we've found is that those questions have primarily been answered. 91% of CISOs say that they value cyber threat intelligence. The question is no longer, is this helpful? But how can we scale this? How are we using it? And that actually introduces a lot of additional questions. One of the things that we've found most interesting as well was scalability. We know that most CTI teams, even though we see this huge jump in value to CTI, most teams remain small. And that means that the more that they need to do, we're going to have to start coming up with new ways, creative ways to meet all of those additional needs. And one of those ways is actually adoption of AI in CTI. We've been asking, I think this is maybe the second year we've been asking, maybe the third. I see Andreas thinking over there about the use of AI in CTI. And it's been long enough that different organizations, different practitioners are finding ways to leverage AI to help both with that scalability, but also some other unique ways that they're using it to support their programs. And so this report really shows an industry that continues to evolve and continues to adapt even as its influence grows. And I'll pass it over to Andreas to talk about our first significant finding.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebekah. So if we want to say, for example, to see what is the most important learning and finding of this, we would say that we have this kind of influence paradox. What we did to identify this one, first of all, this year, for first time, we asked about 65 CISOs and chief security officers, and through a CISO survey, like what is the value that you get, and what is the information that you need from CTI, how CTI influences your decision making. And what we found out, like 90% of them, they value CTI. So CTI, it's there, it's established. It's not like if we are credible as CTI analysts. Nobody's questioning if we are accurate or not. So we are there, and we have gone all the way. However, the question, and I think the critical question and finding for us, it's like, why, while we are regarded as really significant for the CISO, for the C-suite, why our intelligence does not influence significantly the decision? And this is something that traditionally we're struggling as CTI analysts. I think we're very good from our perspective to showcase why we need CTI, but showing the value of CTI, engaging with the stakeholders, especially the CISO audiences, adjust and make the requirements, understand the requirements, and enable the decision makers about enterprise risk, investment, and all this kind of stuff. So we don't need only to describe the threats, but at the executive level, we need to let them and enable the stakeholders to take decisions based on intelligence. So we need to give them all this kind of decision packages, as we call it, that will enable the decision makers, especially at CISO and executive level. This was the finding number one. Next slide, please, Rebekah, for finding number two, which is consistently, as when I was speaking with students during the SANS classes and with my clients, hey, Andreas, how many people do I need for my CTI team? Do I need 8 people? Do I need 10 people, 2 people? So it was, if I'm not mistaken, Rebekah, it was like 3 years ago, we started asking this question. We see more and more use cases being supported by CTI teams. We need more and more organizations having a dedicated CTI team. I think it was 8 or 10 years ago, it was 32%. Now we have 56% of the organizations and the respondents, they have a dedicated CTI team. 1 out of 5, they have a hybrid team with shared responsibility, and like 13%, they have a one-person CTI team. What we see, and when we ask them about FTEs, how many full-time employees they have in their CTI team, last year it was 66% had under 4 full-time employees, from 0.5 to 4. And this year, it's a little bit even bigger, like 70% of the respondents, they have like less than 4 FTEs within their CTI team. What does this mean for us? Since this kind of numbers remain consistent, if they're not growing like organizations that have less than 4 FTEs, I think we have to adopt, like the program leaders should stop expecting that this will self-correct. And what we need to do is make sure that we plan about the top use cases based on the resources that we have. Remember, prioritize, design your program based on the priorities that you have and your available resources. Next slide, please. every year, I think from 2017, we consistently in this survey ask this question about your collection. What your collection, your CTI collection looks like? What is the information you collect? And we try to make the diff every year and try as time goes by, to identify different trends. The last 5 years, when we were asking the CTI analyst what is the major source that they collect in their intelligence collection plan, which is one of the critical pillars of a CTI program, like the intelligence collection plan, for 5 years, it was mostly news, cybersecurity news, and media. And this year, as you can see, it's number fourth. So we saw a decline of this kind of source. Now you might be wondering why we have this decline. I think based on an assessment, it doesn't mean that media outlets or cybersecurity news sources they do a bad job or whatever. But maybe a little bit, CTI people are a little bit more skeptical in collecting the source. Maybe we assess, maybe it's also it's likely growing prevalence of AI generated content. And we have seen also the same happening with social media. In social media, there's also quite a lot of AI generated content. Last year, as a collection source was, if I'm not mistaken, it was about 65%. And we see now it dropped back all the way down to 49%. As you can see, the top sources that are collected by CTI analysts, open source and public CTI feeds, public intelligence reports, and vendor threat feeds. I always anchor on one type of source that I think as collectively as a discipline we can do better, which is incident response and forensics. So think about this is the data about all the threat actors, the incidents, the threat actors that have already been present in the logs of our organizations. Now the question is, Andreas, we realize that we have the tools, we have diamond models, we have all the kill chain analysis, all the tools to do it. Why, as CTI analysts, we don't deep dive into this type of data? And most likely this is happening because of structure, like organization, like silos, or maybe capabilities or capacity, maybe no time left for deep diving into this kind of data. So we understand as CTI analysts the value, but sometimes we don't have the resources, or we have organization silos that does not enable us to deep dive into this collection source. But definitely, if you ask me, it's probably one of the number one or number two sources that every CTI team should collect and deep dive. If we go to finding number four, and next slide, we've identified a couple of interesting gaps from a communication and governance perspective. First of all, I have to say that when we ask all the CTI responders, what's the major method for disseminating intelligence? By far, number one was reporting. And we see reporting being prevalent at least the last 2 to 3 years. We saw an uptick in CTI reporting as the primary method of dissemination. This year, we also asked one new question, like, does your CTI team have a fully defined portfolio of the CTI products and the CTI services? So people, internal stakeholders can go and identify, hey, I'm interested in this service or this product, so I'll subscribe. Do I have access? And why do we need this kind of portfolio, published portfolio? Because I think as CTI teams get more mature, they need to have a defined set of products and services. We don't want to have quite a lot of ad hoc requests, and make sure that we provide valuable based on the resources that we have. You see, 1 out of 3 CTI teams have a fully defined product and service portfolio, and 45% of them that have a defined portfolio, they're supported by project management and service delivery management, which is quite interesting because think about this skill set needs to exist in your CTI team. Doesn't matter if it's a CTI analyst or an external source, you should have the capability to pull like PMs or project management support or service delivery support. So again, think about it. We need to plan in order to have the outputs that we want and make sure that we have defined services for the CTI team. I will pass it over to Rebekah to deep dive a little bit on the major use cases.
Thanks, Andreas. One of the reasons that it is especially important to have some sort of a portfolio or an expected list of deliverables and to have that support is that one of the things we've seen across the survey is that the different ways that CTI is being leveraged in an organization continues to grow. This is the first year in a couple that we have actually seen security operations reclaim the top use case. The past few years, it has been threat hunting. One of the possible reasons for this is not that threat hunting is necessarily being leveraged less, but a lot of that output, a lot of the findings from the past few years where we've had a strong emphasis on threat hunting is now being fed directly into security operations and is supporting those day-to-day operations and daily defense work. But what that means is that it can actually generate a lot more work. And when that happens, you're also more susceptible to receive a lot of those ad hoc requests that Andreas was mentioning that can both take analysts' time and can kind of detract from other maybe more formalized programs that the teams are trying to implement in order to deal with those other issues we mentioned, like small teams and increased workloads. So in addition to security operations, threat hunting, and incident response, CTI is increasingly being leveraged in places like vulnerability management and security awareness. Security awareness is one of those areas that we believe CTI can be really valuable. Because now, not only, especially if you are leveraging that internal incident response data that Andreas mentioned, you can tailor that security awareness to your organization. And it won't just be a general threat, but you can customize it and make sure that individuals know specifically the types of threats that you're seeing in your organization and how they should respond. So that's an area where there is a lot of opportunity. But again, it should be something formalized and not necessarily ad hoc or something that the team just decides to do. It should be, as with all of these, intentional in order to make sure that you, as a team, can support all of these different use cases. And then even more, I think, recently we've seen things like executive decision support and physical security benefiting from CTI inputs as well. And that executive decision support is really what's going to help close that influence gap where CISOs and other leadership believe that CTI has value, but might not necessarily know how to leverage it into the decisions they're making for the organization, not just about security, but about how the entire organization's functioning. So all of these different use cases are currently being used in some shape or form. And again, the teams aren't growing. They're just being asked to often do more as the value of CTI is realized across this portfolio. Another finding that we wanted to call out is this feedback blind spot. Teams are doing more. They are working still with often less than 4 full-time employees. And that taking that time to say, is this effective? What are we doing? Has it been helpful? How is it being used? That is yet another task that a CTI organization or a team needs to do. And as we'll talk about the different barriers, time is one of those huge barriers that we're continuing to see. And one of the things that we've noticed from looking at the survey results over the years is that teams don't always gather feedback about how their outputs are affecting the organization. In fact, less than around 50% say that they do gather feedback, and that's actually down from what we saw last year. We are theorized that this is because teams are just being asked to do more. And when you're asked to do more, closing that loop and saying, how is this effective? What should we do next time? Is the cadence right? Is the material right? Those types of follow-up questions end up falling to the wayside as teams move just to the next thing, the next deliverable that they need to do. Similarly, about 43% actually track the program maturity over time to say as a program, not just as an individual product or report or output, but holistically, how is our program growing? Are we meeting the needs? Are we supporting the things that need to be supported? And without these kind of feedback loops, it can be really hard for teams to know where they should be focusing their time and effort, especially when that time is becoming more and more limited as they're being asked to do more things. And so this is just, I think this is something Andreas and I both talk about when we teach in particular, is that your CTI can only be as effective as it is if you actually know how it's being used. And that means you need to close that feedback loop. A lot of teams do that with stakeholder meetings. But as time goes on, if you are able to implement processes to gather consistent, regular feedback, generate metrics, those are the sorts of things that are going to help you make not only your individual products better, but your organization functionality as a whole. So one of the ways that teams are trying to become more effective and are trying to kind of bridge that gap between expectations and the actual time they have to deliver these outputs is by integrating AI into their operations. Now we see over 75% of respondents are either currently using or planning to adopt AI in their CTI programs. And a lot of the write-in responses talked about how it can be sort of a force multiplier or a time save, where analysts are trying to use AI to support those repeatable tasks that they do, and really just find the things that AI is good at supporting in a program, rather than trying to just implement it across, everything and across the board. So some of the ways that we are seeing it used most frequently are things like data summarization and report writing. We talk a lot in the SANS CTI class about making sure that you are writing for your audience. So are you talking to that security operations team that is leveraging CTI so heavily? Or are you speaking to an executive audience? You will write things differently. You will have different products and different outputs for those different audiences. One of the ways that we're seeing AI being used is to help differentiate and create those different levels of reports, levels of output that are going to help your audience better absorb CTI and the way that they receive it best. Another way it's being used is data parsing, normalization, and extraction, which can often be one of the most tedious parts of CTI. Speaking for myself, I'm sure there are a lot of people who love that part the most, but that is one of the areas where AI really is supporting CTI workflows. It's one of the things that it is suited for. And what that does is it takes away a lot of the kind of repeatable tasks, and it frees analysts up to really focus on that analytic portion, the answering, why is this important? What does this mean for my organization in particular? How does this compare to things that we've seen in the past? And so we continue to see that human in the loop rather than AI taking over CTI operations. And moving into the future, we expect that we will continue to see AI being leveraged intentionally and smartly across CTI and increasingly embedded in different vendor platforms as well. All right, Andreas, I'll pass it back over to you to talk about our CISO survey.
Thanks, Rebekah. I think we can speak many hours about AI in CTI. I mean, it's so hot right now. But we have quite a lot of information within the report. Why we focus, so in the report, we also have a place where we call it, it's the first time we call it CISO Corner. Why we focus on the CISO as a major stakeholder? Think about when you do your stakeholder analysis in the quadrant, who has the power and interest in CTI? Maybe the major stakeholder is the CISO office. So Rebekah said, how do we communicate to these executive audiences? Don't get me wrong, right now, if you ask me one intelligence product to disseminate to the CISO office or to the CISO, it's going to be a threat landscape reports. If you ask me, I see threat landscape report everywhere for CTI teams. I think it should be one, and I think data also support and back like 89% of the CISOs, they appreciate and they understand the threats that their organization faces through threat landscape reports. But it's interesting as well, they care about real world impact. Information about the incidents is always kind of interesting because they had impact. So it's interesting for the CISO and executive audience. What did we know? How CTI supported? What we learned from intelligence perspective after an incident that impacted our organization, especially a major incident. If you look at the bottom of this kind of figure, you're going to be wondering why on earth the strategic audiences have very low, preference for business focused reports or quarterly strategic reporting. So this is not a demand problem, it's a production problem. It means that most likely from a CTI perspective, we don't focus that much on this kind of business focused or quarterly strategic reporting that we can convey to our CISO audiences. Next slide, please. Because we followed up to CISOs and we gave them like 5 questions, like what information do you think it's relevant? So CISOs want real information about sometimes too operational, but what I interpreted like this, it's they want information about things that are happening and impacting their organization. So learning for us, we don't need to describe the threats, build decision packages, and let them know how this is relevant to the organization and what decisions they have to take. Also, as a recommendation, we're going to say it later on, but start focusing on business-focused intelligence, strategic, identify a line of business and work with them, understand their pain points, and start providing strategic intelligence for a specific strategic audience like the CISO or a line of business. Rebekah will follow up with some barriers that we have for the maturity of the CTI team.
So throughout this presentation, we have been calling out some of the biggest barriers that analysts have mentioned. And that number one is tied, actually, lack of time and lack of funding. And that probably resonates with everyone who's listening to this now, because there is never enough time to do all of the things that as CTI analysts we want to do. The threat landscape is getting more complex. It's evolving. Our businesses, our organizations are getting more complex as we adopt new technologies, new methods for doing business. And so that time gap and also that funding gap about could we just hire more people? Could we just get more tools? Could that help deal with time? Those consistently end up being those biggest barriers to teams being able to move forward. If you read through the entire survey, which is wonderful and full of a lot of really good insight as well that we couldn't cover just in our presentation today. We really do focus on ways that teams can be effective without generating more hours in a day, being able to hire more people, or being able to vastly increase the budget. Because we think these are just going to be consistent barriers that teams address and need to learn to work with rather than, again, just trying to magically create more hours in the day. I wish we could do that. And then on the analyst effectiveness challenges, again, these are consistently now organizational and structural challenges rather than individual skills. We have people who know what to do. We have teams that are effective, individuals that are effective, and now we need to address problems like organizational silos and collaboration, burnout from being asked to do so much more with the same amount of resources. And so these are all problems that are solvable and addressable at the organization level rather than at the individual level.
Yeah, so how we move on. So a couple of recommendations based on, doing all the analysis, how you move on with your CTI team. A couple of learnings. So design your team and make sure that you focus on the use cases based on the requirements that you have to satisfy and based on the resources. Identify what are the manual tasks, the low value, high volume tasks. The first step is to automate and then apply AI. So automation is the first step, and then it's applying of the AI. Make sure that you have clear products and portfolio and set realistic stakeholder expectations. Feedback. Do not forget capturing feedback not only about the products, but also about your program. So we are intelligence analysts. Feedback is something that we appreciate. This is what differentiates more or less, in a world that we can at scale provide threat information through AI. The human analyst is the person, the entity that captures feedback, adjusts the intelligence product based on the needs of the stakeholder. And also one tool to do it, it's the CTI, CMM, CTA capability maturity model. We have in this document, there are quite a lot of maturity steps and metrics that you can start tracking. The final one, it's all about governance. Make sure that you are aligned with the policies of your organization. So we have seen that more than 50%, 55% of the CTI team, they don't have an intelligence sharing process external that is signed by the legal team. Think about the regulations are coming and we are obliged to share intelligence. But also when we share, we want to make sure that all the confidential data that we share under NDAs, TLP, we are also aligned with the IT policy. Rebekah, how we move forward?
Absolutely. Following up from our barriers, invest in the analytic culture, not just skills. That's what's going to help make you strong at that organizational level. Help analysts get comfortable with working cross-functionally, with gathering feedback, and with asking questions. Again, as both the threat landscape and our own environments get more complex, we really need analysts who are comfortable asking these tough questions, diving into these problems. And that comes with a strong analytic culture and not just, again, focusing only on those individual skills. And then finally, position CTI as decision support. We are really good, again, at showing how valuable this information is, but the fact that it exists is not enough. We need to take that next step and help leaders understand how they can leverage it to answer all the different questions, all the different decisions they need to make on a day-to-day basis. And this will involve things like understanding what their needs are, deep diving into the CISO survey that Andreas discussed to say, what is it that leaders are actually asking for, and how can our CTI teams meet those needs, even as we remain small and even as our portfolios continue to grow. And so these are not easy things to do, but they are going to result in some really significant impact in our organizations. So finally, we think that we've reached this point where CTI's impact is growing. We no longer ask the question, do we need CTI? We need to start asking, how can we best use it? How can we best leverage it and operationalize it within our own organizations? So the capability is there. People understand how important it is. And now there's just more work that needs to be done to actually bridge that gap to decision support and really impactful threat intelligence. All right, and that's all that Andreas and I have. We're really excited to hear from all of our speakers today about their findings from the report as well. So I will first pass it over to Tal from Wiz to talk about all of your findings from the survey.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rebekah and Andreas, for an awesome presentation. My name is Tal. I'm on the product marketing team at Wiz, focusing on working specifically on Wiz Defend, our cloud detection and cloud threat detection and response product for SOC and SecOps teams. This was an awesome survey for us to read, and especially when we think about the SOC and actually operationalizing cyber threat intelligence for SecOps and the SOC, we were able to draw some really, really interesting conclusions from it. So at Wiz, just as a quick introduction, Wiz focuses obviously specifically on the cloud, but cyber threat intelligence is really fundamental to what we do at Wiz. It is embedded very heavily and directly within each of our products and within our teams themselves. My team, for example, works very closely with our Wiz research team to stay up to date on what's happening in the world around us, that we're up to date on the latest and greatest with threat intelligence. Our teams release yearly cloud threat landscape retrospectives and ensure that our detection engineers are well up to date and up to date with what's happening in the world. But I really love that the survey talked a lot about actually operationalizing CTI for teams today, because that's a word that we love using at Wiz. It's a bit of a mouthful for sure, but it's something that we talk about a lot, because no matter how great the intelligence that teams get is, no matter how thought out it is, if teams can't actually act upon that quickly and effectively, then CTI isn't serving its purpose. So that gap between actually having the intelligence and acting upon it is what I want to talk to you guys about today, and how we actually operationalize it for the modern SOC within our Wiz Defend product. So we just saw a bunch of these metrics, but I wanted to call out a few that we saw as very interesting. So there's some great news. Oh no, why did it do that? No. Okay. I guess I can't be scrolling. I guess I just have to click. So some of the conclusions that we drew from this survey, firstly, is we saw that CTI is increasingly important for SecOps teams. And that is really great news. We see an increasing number of organizations have dedicated CTI teams, and that trend is only improving. And we also saw that SecOps has overtaken threat hunting as a top CTI use case, and that a lot of SecOps teams are actually using CTI for SecOps. And this is a really meaningful shift. It tells us that the industry is moving CTI from a proactive research function towards a real-time, day-to-day defense. And we see that teams are gathering CTI from a variety of sources, that these teams have to understand how to feed all of this data in, take it from different sources, and again, operationalize it in the environment. But as Rebekah and Andreas talked about, operational problems do prevent broad adoption. And we think that the same problems that we see with CTI teams actually preventing operationalization are similar problems that we see actually preventing operationalization of CTI for SecOps teams. So we see organizational blockers like lack of processes, lack of funding, lack of management and buy-in as really strong blockers. And we also see actual operational blockers within teams that, again, we see are very similar for SecOps teams. So, for example, analyst burnout, we know is only increasing and more difficult for SecOps teams. In the era of AI, analyst fatigue, having to do more with less, these same problems that plague CTI teams do plague SecOps teams, and those actually prevent CTI from actually being operationalized within the organization. And we see that this influence gap is only increasing, with CTOs actually saying that they find CTI very valuable, over 90% of them saying that's valuable, but only 26% saying that it actually influences their decisions. So there's obviously an operational gap within there. And we know that CTI has kind of earned a seat at the table, but doesn't really have the influence to drive the action. I believe, and we believe at Wiz, that if you actually properly operationalize cybersecurity within the organization, that it can actually be used in an effective way and drive effective decision making at the organization. And high level, I want to talk a little bit about our view and Wiz Defend's general view. So Wiz Defend is a product, it's a cloud detection and response product built for the modern SOC. And the foundation of Wiz Defend is the belief that SecOps teams need a unified approach that is purpose-built for the cloud with complete context. So our approach takes in telemetry from kind of across your cloud environment, with cloud threat intelligence being extremely foundational to that unified approach. Because again, no matter how good the information you have is, you have to be able to action upon it easily and act upon it quickly. So within Defend, we don't really consider cyber threat intelligence and specifically cloud threat intelligence as a bunch of disparate feeds of information. We consider it one single critical information feed that is really part of this unified approach. This helps ensure that SecOps teams can effectively use threat intelligence to better understand threats in the context of their wider environment. When built in with everything that's happening in your cloud environment based on behavioral analytics, cloud and SaaS signals, your code context, your runtime activity, teams can actually operationalize and action upon this threat intelligence to make sure that they can make accurate decisions and make accurate judgment calls when doing their day-to-day work. High level, this is a really kind of high level picture of how this actually works within Wiz. So we take in all of your code to cloud risk context, including that wonderful cloud threat intelligence, whether it's from our own Wiz research team, from third-party threat intelligence feeds, or threat hunting that we do in-house. We layer it into our Wiz security graph and our Wiz signals lake to make sure it's contextualized within your environment to then help SecOps teams do what they do best, which is prepare, detect, investigate, and respond to threats. And as a quick wrap up, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about how Wiz Defend and the wider Wiz set of products are effectively grounded in cyber threat intelligence, specifically typically focusing on the cloud. So as I mentioned, we have our Wiz research team that is constantly doing wonderful, wonderful work within the environment. We released our cloud threat landscape report. I think it was maybe like a month ago at this point. This is a report that we've been doing for the past couple of years to really assess what's going on in the cloud threat landscape, give you guys a great overview of what's going on. They also do amazing work day to day. They have been absolutely slammed handling some of these supply chain attacks that we've seen in the wild the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months. And they're consistently releasing reports. And they're keeping our teams, as well as the wider world, updated on what's going on. Within Wiz Defend, we also have our Threat Intelligence Center, where existing customers can actually go in to see the latest and greatest from our research team to understand what active threats and campaigns are going on in the world around them. And they can actually go in and, again, if they're existing customers, see if they're affected. So they can ask whether it's asking our Mika AI or checking their open issues or open threats. They can see if they're affected by what's going on within the wider environment. So again, really making sure that it's easy to operationalize and understand the conclusions and the information that you're getting from cyber threat intelligence that you're ingesting. We also have our research team creating, maintaining, and updating at this point about 3,000 to 4,000 out-of-the-box threat detection rules for our Wiz Defend customers. Each one of these is consistently tuned and updated by our research team to make sure that users of Wiz Defend are actually updated and covered for what's going on in the environment and making sure that they can detect active threats. And finally, it wouldn't be a talk in cybersecurity if we didn't talk about AI and how we operationalize AI within our environments. So to further operationalize CTI and make sure that teams can action upon it very quickly, we have our Wiz Blue Agent. If any of you guys maybe stop by our booth at any of our recent conferences like RSA or Google Cloud Next, or if you've seen any of our recent blog posts, I would highly recommend checking them out. Our agents are super cute, aside from being very, very useful. They're very cutely designed, and they have a whole design system around them, and it's very, very fun. But our Blue Agent is really that accelerator. So obviously, AI is really, really helpful in this space, but our Blue Agent isn't just another layer of AI. It's embedded directly within the Wiz Defend products as your investigator and triager for your SecOps teams. So the Blue Agent, when a threat fires in your environment, it will actually go in and investigate and triage the threats that happen in your environment. And because it's trained on the context of your environment and everything else that's going on, it can actually triage and investigate in a very deep way. Something that's super unique about our Blue Agent is it doesn't just have the context from the Wiz security graph. It's actually trained on a knowledge base that's very particular to Wiz. This knowledge base is maintained and updated by our incident response team and our Wiz research team. So this means that the agent, when it investigates, is actually acting and investigating like a seasoned incident responder. So when seasoned incident responders or researchers would investigate an incident, they would probably actually check their CTI feeds. They would see what's going on in the world around them, what do I have to be aware of, what is important, and they would embed that into their investigation. The Blue Agent does the same thing. Again, because the knowledge base is maintained and consistently updated, it knows the latest and greatest with what's going on in the threat landscape around you to ensure that CTI and whatever feeds that you actually ingest into the product are actually used and useful. And you can see within the Blue Agent, if you see one of our demos, you can see that it will increase or decrease its suspicion or change its verdict based on some CTI that it's getting in. So the Blue Agent is able to take in this information along with all the rest of the context from your environment and actually generate a verdict about a threat. And again, that verdict of, say, malicious or planned action or suspicious requires more investigation by a human. It's taking all that information in, and that makes CTI really, really easy and automatic to operationalize in the environment for SecOps teams to actually solve their most important use cases. I think I have one more minute and I don't see any open questions, but I think if no one wants to hear more about our agents, that's okay. But I'm available whether it's on LinkedIn or we have demos that are actually available as well. I think I'll be handing it over maybe back to you, Rebekah.
Yes, thank you so much. I really want to see these agents now. Like I have not had the opportunity. I'm gonna have to come find you all at the next show so I can check these out.
So like plug, but at the conferences we hand out little dolls of them and they're very, very popular. I want to say not just for children, but like also for me. I wish I had one here, but we have like doll versions of all the agents. If y'all want to stop by, I highly recommend it.
Amazing. Thank you so much. All right. And with that, I will hand it over to Bridget from Broadcom.
Hi, thanks Rebecca and Tal. Thanks for really interesting presentations so far. So yeah, I'm Bridget. I'm a senior intelligence analyst here on the Semantic and Carbon Black Threat Hunter team in Broadcom. And I'm going to discuss a couple of, I suppose, somewhat interrelated findings from the survey today, I guess in the context of my own experiences working in cybersecurity, and also, I suppose, in the general context of what we're seeing on the cyber threat landscape at the moment as well. Do I have control? I do. There we go. So I suppose the first finding I'd like to discuss that I thought was interesting to me was that CTI is operating at scale, but not scaling in size. And I would say that's probably not a surprise to many of us working in the industry. I mean, we're obviously a cybersecurity company, and our threat intelligence team, our threat hunter team, is very much operating with limited resources now. So, of course, that is going to be true for CTI teams in other industries as well. And the surveys found that CTI teams do remain quite small, as Andreas and Rebekah discussed earlier, even as that scope and demand for CTI functions does continue to expand. And this constraint then shapes how programs prioritize things like automation and tooling and training and product definition. And it's increasingly central to that sustainability of an organization's CTI functions. And I guess, while we have seen CTI's scope and things like executive expectations and integration demands growing, the SANS survey found that team sizes have remained pretty flat since they started to track employee numbers a couple of years ago. And I think that definitely does create that kind of do more with less dynamic that can probably help explain many of the challenges that are discussed in this report too. The challenges of influencing decision making in kind of a real way of providing intelligence that is actually actionable and of value to the business. And of course, the human challenges then, as others have mentioned already, of team members facing burnout due to those limited resources and those high expectations that exist side by side. But despite these challenges and the challenges teams face, um, as the guy said, 91% of CISOs that were surveyed did say they recognize CTI as valuable or extremely valuable. But, perhaps despite that, the resourcing, isn't necessarily always there, even though the acknowledgement of the value of the operation is. When we look at pull out some of the figures then, as we said, 90% of organizations said they had assigned CTI resources, but of course that is just the organizations who respond to this survey. So obviously there is an element of self-selection there. And of those, I suppose 56% had dedicated teams, 20% of that shared model, and then 13% had just one individual staff member comprising their CTI operation. And of that 56% with those formal teams, that is a little uptick from the previous SANS survey, I believe, where it was 51 to 52%. But then 1 in 5 have that shared responsibility model. That also shows that hybrid approach remains very common, particularly for organizations where the threat landscape or budget constraints don't justify a standalone unit, which is obviously a lot of businesses, really, most businesses that exist really probably will find it hard to justify a standalone unit. And I think this model is an important one to bear in mind, as I would imagine as with the advance of AI, increasing pressure on resources, kind of job cuts we're seeing in many industries, that hybrid models could become even more common as we go forward. The majority of CTI teams then as well, as Andreas touched on earlier, I think continue to operate with quite small numbers, fewer than 4 full-time equivalent staff members, and only 18% of teams larger than 10 full-time staff members. So that just suggests that those kind of very large, specialised CTI units do remain quite rare and are typically limited to those very large enterprises, government agencies, or of course cybersecurity companies themselves. And I think that persistence of small CTI teams, despite growing expectations of CTI, is, not temporary. And I would might say the working assumption really for all of us should be that most CTI teams now probably will remain under that 4 full-time staff members for many companies. And I guess we should all be building processes and tooling and keeping that in mind as we try to provide services to these companies as well. And even we can see on our own team that, cyber threat intelligence, even though we're, a threat hunter team, can be sometimes sidelined because other elements of threat response, such as, obviously detection and response itself, do become prioritized. However, despite the fact that teams are so lean now, I think, expectations and that expectation of providing kind of really powerful thought leadership does remain high. And certainly, I think the combination of that leanness with those expectations does mean that in the current, obviously, world we're all existing in, AI is definitely going to be key going forward to bridge that gap that we see between the resources that we have and the expectations that exist as well. So, how does our own threat hunter team, deal with this leanness in practice? Alongside those high demands that we have to meet. So, as the SANS survey says, CTI teams definitely do benefit from clearly defining their intelligence outputs and also ensuring that those outputs are clearly communicated as well. So having that defined portfolio is really critical, and that is what we aim to do as well. Because if you don't define what you deliver, as was said earlier, you can constantly get pulled into ad hoc requests, and then you feel like you achieve nothing really. So we aim to avoid that by having a defined content portfolio that we produce depending on the circumstances and depending on, I suppose, what we're trying to communicate. So, for example, we use quarterly white papers to take deep dives into major issues on the cyber threat landscape, such as ransomware. Or AI was one we did recently, and we have an upcoming one on bring your own vulnerable driver threats. And we do those kind of papers in order to give our customers a deeper understanding of the major issues on the threat landscape at the moment and the influence they kind of have on what we're seeing. We also produce regular blogs on newsworthy topics such as new investigations or novel attacks in order to get that information to as wide an audience as possible and to obviously inform our customers and also the general public through the media about what's happening. And they do, of course, then also serve to help raise the profile of our team and our threat intelligence capabilities and operation. We produce a daily threat landscape bulletin as well that synopsizes the biggest cybersecurities of the day, and we send that both internally and to customers to keep them informed of what's happening on the threat landscape. And we also have our threat intelligence API where we share IOCs with our customers, as well as regular rapid threat alerts that share the kind of headline information about an attack or incident we may have seen, and then the related IOCs and TTP so the customers can take steps to protect their systems, hunt on their own systems, etc., as quickly as possible. And the threat alerts, I think, are definitely an example of content that has an operational impact, which CISOs did underline as being important to them when it comes to CTI in the SANS survey. And when it comes to then how, I suppose, the team operates and I suppose how we use AI and use the human resources we have as well, how one thing leads into another, it's all quite cyclical in nature. We have our threat hunters who investigate incidents on customer networks. And we then may, produce content about those incidents if it's appropriate. And then those findings are also used to train AI analytics to detect similar activity. Those analytics can then generate new investigation leads, which are then investigated by the hunters, which we can then potentially publish content about, and so on and so forth. So, and Symantec does have a long background in using AI to scale up, as I'll discuss a bit more later in this presentation. And that's continuing as well. Initially AI was, I suppose, used for detection and remediation purposes, but now it's certainly been used within the CTI operation itself as well. I suppose as a reflection of how we're all working with more limited resources, too, we're using AI now to assist with, as so many businesses are, as the survey shows, to assist with things like summarization, in some cases for initial drafts of content, also to parse some more technical details of an attack into plain English. But the important thing to note is that every piece of intelligence does go through analyst review, and I do think that's, probably the model that we would want to see going forward, that we have that kind of automation for scale, I guess, or for volume, but then we have that human judgment still there to make sure that the quality remains high as well. And just as we ourselves are facing resourcing challenges, we know too, and the SANS survey tells us, that customers are facing those challenges as well. And it was with those challenges in mind that Broadcom and the Carbon Black and Symantec team within Broadcom decided to launch Symantec CBX with the aim of trying to fill that resourcing gap. And Symantec CBX unifies Symantec and Carbon Black's kind of capabilities into a cloud-based XDR platform that helps to deliver AI-driven insights and enterprise-grade protections without the enterprise-level complexity. So it's built really for those resource-constrained teams that we've already discussed, and it aims to help reduce costs, to cut things like alert fatigue, to help accelerate response, and to help give organizations an advantage against new and existing threats that we're seeing all the time. And it's the first fully featured XDR platform that is built expressly for those smaller teams who want to evolve their kind of security protections, but who may just lack the expertise and the resources needs to configure and optimize the traditional kind of enterprise class XDR solutions. And this survey, the SANS survey, shows us that small teams are very much the norm now. So having tools that help reduce complexity for those teams will be more essential than ever going forward, I would say. And Semantic CBX is run from a unified management console that aims to improve team performance and reduce that complexity for these already stretched teams to help them drive down operational costs, to help them speed time to resolution, to meet government requirements, and to demonstrate progress by improving metrics. And given that one of the issues mentioned in the SANS survey as well was in many ways the kind of immeasurability of the CTI function, I think giving teams an opportunity to demonstrate improved metrics to management as well could be of importance alongside obviously reducing the complexity of the company's security solution. Moving on then, I suppose, to the next survey finding, but I guess it's one we've sort of already been discussing because AI has already been discussed multiple times in this and the earlier presentations. So it's no surprise really to see in the survey that one of the findings was that AI use has shifted from experimental to operational efficiency. Nearly half of organizations now are using AI in their CTI programs, and that emphasis is on reducing analyst workload, helping to improve speed, and but there does remain that strong consensus around keeping a human in the loop as well. Nearly half of the respondents are using AI in operations today, as we said, while another third are planning adoption. And this shows, I suppose, the kind of broad momentum AI has across the CTI space, even if the kind of maturity varies greatly across programs. And in organizations where AI is being used, it's most frequently being used, as we can see from the graphic here, for things like data summarization, report writing, parsing and normalizing large amounts of available information, and also then for automating workloads. And these are all tasks that can help reduce analysts' manual efforts and help to speed up delivery of things as well. AI was also widely credited for helping analysts prioritize threats, ranking vulnerabilities, extracting IOCs and TTPs from reports, as well as summarizing information into more readable formats for people. However, as we said, the human in the loop model does remain dominant, and the responses to the survey did consistently emphasize that as well, emphasize the importance of analyst oversight to help manage accuracy, confidence, trust, especially for important decisions. And AI's influence also seemed to be apparent when survey respondents were asked about the barriers they were experiencing in CTI because blockers such as a lack of technical or analytical skills were cited much as frequently than they had been previously, suggesting that things like automation and AI have helped to maybe offset some of the resourcing issues by reducing, as you said, that kind of repetitive work, the kind of things AI is good at, and then giving the teams more capacity to do the kind of processes that only humans, I suppose, are really able to do. And hopefully, as we said, freeing up time and budget and hopefully reducing the chances of burnout, which, as we said, is a big issue again for CTI teams. Of course, though, just as good guys like ourselves are using AI, so are the bad guys. When it comes to attackers using AI, I suppose so far primarily the way we've seen attackers using AI is using LLMs to write phishing materials, which obviously is particularly advantageous for attackers who do not have English as a first language, but can use AI then to write much more convincing emails than they probably otherwise would have been able to. And we've also seen AI being used to help attackers write code, which you can generally tell when AI has been used to write code due to a lot of comments on the code and things like that you just wouldn't normally see if they had been done by a human coder. And obviously, these things can serve to speed up attacks, as well as, and I think this is kind of the important point, lowering the barrier to entry and allowing less experienced actors to carry out attacks that they otherwise probably would not have the skills to execute. And I suppose the big fear now is that advancements in AI with tools like Claude Mythos and others is that these can be used to find zero-day vulnerabilities. I mean, we have already seen AI being used to find vulnerabilities in many products, but the fear would be that they could find zero-day vulnerabilities, write exploits for them immediately, giving defenders then no chance to implement protections before vulnerabilities are exploited. So while obviously it's advantageous for companies if vulnerabilities can be found by AI and fixed in their products, if vulnerabilities can be found by the bad guys and exploited before they can be fixed, that's going to be a major problem. And I suppose if attackers, are successful in using AI for those purposes in the near future, that's going to present a huge challenge, I think, for CTI teams and, of course, for cybersecurity vendors like ourselves as well. However, I suppose we don't want to focus on the negative points of AI too much because, as we've already said, there's no doubting its usefulness as a force multiplier. And that has become more apparent all the time, its ability to free up resources, to enable human resources to be redirected towards where they bring the most value. And as we go forward, of course, agents will be used to further amplify productivity by, in many cases, managing end-to-end workflows independently. And we know that AI is just going to become more widely adopted by customers as well. But I do think one of the most important things to remember, which was underlined in the survey as well, is the importance of keeping that human in the loop because while AI can obviously be used for many things to take over repetitive tasks and free up resources, it is obviously still very much fallible and, we can't blindly trust it, which is why clarification, fact checking and analysis by humans remains very important for the time being anyway. But maybe the final thought I'll leave you with when it comes to AI, and it's important to note, I think, is that while AI is newish territory for attackers in ways, we as defenders have been using it for decades. I mean, it started nearly 20 years ago when we started using machine-based learning systems to create protections for malicious files. The next step after that was we started to train systems to block not just malicious files, but to recognize and block malicious behaviors as well. So regardless of what a file was attempting, what file it was, if it was attempting to perform a particular set of actions, the behavior will be blocked if that was determined to be malicious. We then trained on reputation, so rather than nothing about what a file does or what it is, more about the metadata around it. We were able to create analytics that determined the file's reputation based on things like how prevalent it was, if it was signed or unsigned, where it came from, how old it was, things like that. And then about 10 years ago, we introduced cloud analytics and a little bit more recently, adaptive protection. Cloud analytics is AI-based analytic, and that's trained on all of the targeted attacks that we see in the course of our work. It learns to identify similar patterns of malicious behavior. So then a customer can get an alert in their console, which essentially tells them something suspicious that's consistent with targeted attack activity happening on your network, and maybe you want to investigate that. Adaptive protection then monitors the network for a set period of time. It learns what is a normal expected behavior and what isn't, and then begins to block any outliers. So it kind of creates a personalized policy for a customer. And it can be just to let run, and it can also be fine-tuned by the administrators as well. An incident prediction then, which we introduced last year, really leans into AI and uses AI learners to predict an attacker's next 4 to 5 moves, allowing teams to stop threat actors in their tracks, literally, to prevent them from moving laterally to do things like steal data or shut down systems or deploy ransomware. And we will continue, of course, to use AI to help improve our detection and response capabilities. So I think while we may worry a lot, and rightly so, about attackers using AI, it is important to note that I suppose defenders have been using this technology for a long time in many ways to come, and will continue to do so as well and help in order to, provide that protection for our customers. That's all from me, I think. So I think I'll be handing back over to Rebekah again.
Amazing. Thank you so much. With that, we are going to jump into our first panel. And so, Bridget, feel free to stick around, keep your camera on, and then I will invite Matt and Will to hop on so we can have my favorite part of these is actually the panels and the Q&A. So everyone who's joining us, feel free to put your questions into that Q&A tab under Zoom, and I will be happy to ask, whether it's everyone or anyone in particular. Otherwise, I have some questions of my own. But before we jump into that, we had a chance to get to know a little bit about Bridget and your background. But Matt, do you want to just do a quick intro and let us know who you are and what your role here is in CTI?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Matt Moss. I'm a senior sales engineer at ESA North America. I've been with the organization for about 8 years at this point in time. Prior to this role, I used to work in all kinds of different IT roles, things like mainframe systems programming, if you can believe that, network engineering, Unix, Linux systems administration. But I'm happy in my role now because I get to talk to people about what ESET does. I really truly believe in the organization, and I really like what we have in terms of offerings regarding CTI specifically.
Awesome. Thank you. And Will, you want to do a quick intro?
Sure. Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you for having me. So my name is Will Glass. I'm a senior Intel collection manager at Intel 471. I've been closing in on close to 2 years here. We focus on really helping a lot of our customers understand how to best operationalize the intelligence that we provide, providing support to them in terms of tailored briefings and stuff like that as well. I've been doing cybersecurity intelligence for about 15 years. Attended, I don't know, a dozen and a half SANS events, so really special to be able to participate in one. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thank you all. So let's dive right into some of our questions. I guess some of the questions that I have. As Bridget pointed out, one of the things we have been talking about a lot is AI and how AI can be used as a force multiplier. And so I guess I'll start. Let's start with Will. How have you seen AI changing the CTI industry?
Wow, small question. So I think, I guess I'll approach it from two sides. From an analyst perspective, right, it really offers a lot of opportunities to be able to scale up production, be able to produce more reporting. But I think it's important to understand about the recipients of that information and how are they using it. Do you need to be producing things that have lots of prose and images? Do you need to be producing something that's machine readable? And so if folks are having to translate what you're producing into something that's useful for them, they might have a harder time making use of that. The other piece I think that I personally haven't gotten that comfortable with, and maybe that's because I've been doing this for enough time, is trusting what the output is, right? Being able to go and validate, like, hey, the report that I've maybe generated using an AI model has said, these 5 different things, but I need to go back and actually validate that those things are correct. I think that's super important for us because those downstream impacts of making control changes or changing a policy are really going to potentially be impactful to users or customers or what have you. So we need to be making sure that we're pushing cogent arguments downward. From the attacker side as well, I mean, that's something that we're very concerned about, right? Following very closely, understanding how those capabilities are being used by threat groups to make better phishing pages or, use deepfake media to bypass things like know your customer or like liveness checks flows, for example, and stuff like that. What we're, I think, looking for more now, and as all these models get more advanced, is direct weaponization of them in some specific examples that we've seen in the past, using them to generate, or sorry, using prompts to generate capabilities, do system scanning on, potential attack target environments and stuff like that. So a big area of concern for sure. It'll keep us all busy for many months and years to come.
Thank you. Bridget, you talked about adversarial use of AI. Actually, and that was a really interesting comment, is that you're seeing like more comments in the code, which we normally wouldn't see from attackers' code bases. Are there any other things that you're seeing that are really maybe concerning you or that you're preparing for when it comes to adversaries' use of AI?
Well, I think, as I said, one of the most kind of concerning things I would think is how AI has already, and I mean, as AI continues to advance, no doubt will continue to kind of lower that barrier for entry. So I think it just kind of opens up the number of attackers that, we could be facing really, and also the kind of speed that it allows. Attackers to, operationalize as well, because obviously they can just automate so many attacks now, automated scanning for vulnerabilities. As I said, I mean, that's definitely one of the big, I suppose, concerns going forward, is that automated scanning for vulnerabilities. And if attackers are able to find vulnerabilities very quickly, if they're then able to, automatically write exploits for them, automatically start trying to exploit them, I mean, that is going to be a huge challenge, I think, for, all of us going forward, is, I suppose, trying to stay ahead of attackers when it comes to things like that. Because, as we say, we're all using AI for different purposes, and it obviously, can be used to great advantage by all of us to help improve our offerings and to help hopefully make things more secure for our customers as well. But then the issue is that attackers are out there as well, also, in many cases with that, obviously with access to the same tools in lots of cases that we have access to, and trying to use them for their own nefarious ends. And obviously, the AI systems try to build in guardrails and things like that to try and prevent them being used for malicious purposes. But of course, attackers are famously pretty good at bypassing things like that. So I think that's the big concern. It's that kind of lowering the barrier to entry. That means there are just more attackers out there, and also that kind of speed that it can give them to automate attacks and, potentially cause a lot of damage before, we're able to do anything to stop them.
Yeah. Hopefully we can use the benefits of AI to help balance out some of this adversarial use. I
Yeah,
think definitely means that we, as an industry, that's why I was actually I was glad to see that it's being used more and being adopted more, because again, the challenges that we're going to be having to face as an industry are also increasing. Matt, so
absolutely.
jumping over to you. So ESET, I've been following your reporting for a long time. And ESET's traditionally been kind of like a research focused organization. But lately we've really seen this shift and this jump into talking more about CTI. How do you view kind of those two, both the research and the CTI? And can that help? One of the things we've been talking about is the influence gap. So how you can take that research and use it in the form of CTI to influence decisions.
Well, that's a pretty good question when it comes down to it. In terms of taking CTI and using that to influence decisions, we actually have a couple of offerings specifically revolving around CTI specifically. One of them is a set of data feeds that we have, about 20 feeds at this point in time, that you can use to do some very, very actionable work. We have very, very heavily curated data feeds specifically that you can import into systems and take action on immediately because of that curation, because the fact that the data in them is so hot right now at this specific point in time. When it comes down to other aspects of CTI, we also have reports that are available, not just for, let's say, technical analysts, but also for people in, let's say, senior positions, CISOs, things like that, human readable reports to include digests. So basically, we have a monthly overview report that's really meant for executives, CISOs, things along those lines, management. And we've even got a digest of that monthly overview, which is essentially just a one-pager that kind of lists out the things to be aware of. And when it comes down to CTI and influencing decision making, well, realistically, that monthly overview, that monthly digest can in fact be quite valuable just to keep people abreast as to what we're actually seeing in the cybersecurity space. Like you mentioned there, Rebekah, we have been known for quite some time as a huge, huge research house. We spend a lot of, let's say, resources and emphasis on ensuring that our cybersecurity research teams are well funded, well taken care of, and that they have the proper tool sets, to include being able to use AI as part of those tool sets too, as a way to kind of balance out the whole bad actors using the AI stuff. Well, we can do that stuff too, right? It's ultimately just a tool at the end of the day. So in terms of CTI influencing decision making, I really kind of suggest people look at things like reports, human readable reports, because that can help to influence which direction any organization might want to go with respect to kind of security issues there at the end of the day. I hope that helps to answer your question there.
Yeah, thank you. And so, speaking of reports, one of the trends that we saw this year is kind of that decrease in collection from things like news media and social media, and more of an emphasis on, not only the feeds like you were just mentioning, Matt, but also actual like intelligence reporting. And I know all of your organizations do put out things like public reports. I know, Bridget, you mentioned blog posts and things like that. How do you and your teams decide what should be reported on and what should be included in there to make sure that you are, I guess, really generating good signal rather than just kind of adding to the noise that's out there as well? Will, I can start with you there.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. So we have a pretty rigorous kind of categorization system that we use from the sources that we run on the underground when they are engaging with threat actors. We get to know them, for lack of a better term. We understand their reliability over time. What's their history of providing value or providing information that is proven to be true or untrue going forward. And so we use that very heavily in kind of caveating all of the reporting that we do about, this actor said they were looking at this particular CVE in this software, and they're looking at these types of organizations. Having that marker on the reporting can help anybody who's reading it to understand, like, hey, this person actually is probably going to be able to do what they're saying they're going to do. As it probably surprises nobody, there are lots of people who lie and scam and otherwise try to, boost their own reputations on the underground. So we have to be very careful that we're looking at that closely, and helping our customers understand they can or cannot believe what they're reading.
Awesome. Bridget?
Yeah, I guess for us, when we think about things like that, I guess it depends on what our output is. We, I suppose, produce various different types of content. So if we're producing, for example, a threat alert, the kind of private reports, kind of brief reports we share with customers, and for that we prioritize that kind of actionable intelligence. So it's like, do we have a good set of IOCs, or do we have good information about a particular actor or campaign? Is it something that people can use to hunt or add to watch lists? That kind of thing. And then with a blog, we have different considerations. We're kind of like, do we have a sort of interesting story we can tell, or kind of a bigger picture that we can, give to people, or is it something very new or very significant that we need to get out to the kind of the widest audience possible? And then for things like papers, I guess, um, it's different. It's the factors change again. We don't really expect papers to get, media coverage or be particularly actionable. But what we want to do is, I guess, create something that gives people a really good overview of a particular topic that we think is going to be important on the threat landscape. So as I said, obviously things like AI, things like ransomware that are always quite topical, like just things that are very important at the moment that we think it would, be beneficial for people to, have a good understanding of. And I suppose we are influenced by our customers as well, like finding out, I suppose, what they value, that has kind of changed our output over time. Like threat alerts are just something we brought in the last few years because we realized customers did want more of that actionable intelligence, and maybe they wanted less of those kind of big, lengthy reports that, many people don't have time to read, but they probably use AI to summarize now anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And actually, and that speaks to that kind of feedback loop as well, gathering information from your customers to make sure that you're tailoring and providing like what you need in particular. And Matt, I know you mentioned like the digest reports that come out, and the fact that you do have a very large internal team that is working on all of these problems. Have you come up with a solution for gathering feedback? That's something that, for the survey, we know that as an industry we struggle with. Is there a mechanism you have in place to determine what should go into those digests, what's important, and how to get that information to feed back into your next product?
Well, when it comes down to feedback specifically, that's going to be something that's kind of dealt with by our research teams explicitly as opposed to me necessarily. In terms of feedback I might receive by talking to customers, is more along the lines of talking to customers who are using our feeds and getting information from them with regards to how useful they actually are. And I've got an actual story about that, believe it or not. This is actually a pretty fresh story. I was talking to a colleague very recently, basically about a POC that was being run with a pretty large customer just a few weeks ago, in fact. And this customer in particular, they had 152 CTI data feeds that they were pumping into their systems. And what you would think is with that many feeds, you'd have a huge chance of that same IOC being published by all these different vendors all over the place. So they basically decided to build an internal deduplication pre-filter to strip out repeated information so they could only pass a single instance of each IOC into these security monitoring systems. And they basically started running our own IP data feed, basically our bad IP data feed, through that pre-filter just for a few weeks. And they basically kind of do that as a way to kind of test out different vendors just to see how things work. So there's part of our feedback there in terms of getting data back from our customer base as to whether or not our stuff is actually being effective. And they really wanted to see whether or not there would be any real value with respect to us being feed number 153, because that's realistically a lot of feeds. What they ended up doing after a couple of weeks of testing was to let us know over email that our feed apparently had 97% uniqueness, and they thought that was pretty rare. And it's nice to get that feedback, let's be honest, because when it does come down to putting together any of these outputs, getting data back from the people who are actually using it, the end users, the consumers themselves, to let you know how effective that ends up being a very, very good way to ensure or at least confirm that what you're putting out there is actually going to be valuable and useful to the community at large. So in terms of, let's say, what kind of feedback loops I might be involved in, it's really about talking to customers, seeing what they're running into, and kind of seeing what they're dealing with. In terms of things like reporting and blogs, we actually have a blog called welivesecurity.com. You can see a lot of free stuff from our cybersecurity research teams being posted there, to include things like threat reports, things along those lines. But I'm involved in lots of webinars when it comes down to, let's say, presenting these threat reports, presenting some of this information that we're collecting. And the feedback we get from those, let's say, events specifically, ends up being generally pretty good in terms of us being timely, us being kind of on the ball with respect to what's actually happening in the cybersecurity space. And realistically, we kind of try to take that same thought, that same mindset whenever we're dealing with our actual data feeds themselves. What you might end up seeing with, let's say, a lot of free open source data feeds is just a ton of information, a mountain's worth of data, just data, 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 data. And there's a lot of noise involved in that too. And when it comes down to kind of ensuring that this data is accurate and timely, what we actually do is, while we leverage some AI tooling to kind of build that data and pull telemetry from over 500,000 business customers worldwide, over 1 billion internet users worldwide as well, what we end up doing is kind of feeding that stuff through our systems and then manually checking it to kind of confirm that everything in there is actually correct. So there's that feedback there with respect to using the AI tools, but also having a human being kind of validate things and confirm things are actually correct at that point in time. And that's one of the pieces of feedback, oddly enough, that I received from some of our customers. The fact that our data feeds are quite well curated to the point that they can actually be used actionably to block things at any given point in time. Because of that analysis that we're doing, we're really looking at hot data. We're really looking at data that is pertinent right now. So if you're dealing with, let's say, our IP feed as an example, if there's an IP in there that's no longer touching our telemetry, we spend some time confirming that command and control server is basically gone, then we're going to basically stop shipping out that IP on the next update for that feed as well. So what we really, really try to do there in terms of feedback is listen to our customer base, listen to the people that kind of attend our events, and in terms of our actual data feeds and our output themselves, always involve a human being to ensure that the, let's say, data being collected and disseminated actually is accurate at that point in time.
Thank you. And I love that idea of keeping the human in the loop as well to kind of filter through. I know, we've been talking about how useful AI can be, but one of the things that we kind of consistently saw when we asked about AI use in CTI right now is that we're still at that point where we do need that human in the loop to interpret some of those signals, because things they might not be as clear as one might think. But what that means, though, is that we do still have lots of work for the individuals to do. And as the survey pointed out, most teams are relatively small still. So, 3 to 4 individuals responsible for all of these things, for collecting the information, analyzing it, disseminating it, gathering that feedback. So we'll start with Will. Do you have any recommendations for teams to scale and address some of these problems, even though they are staying small?
Yeah, it's a challenge that I have personally have fallen into, trying to make sure that the team's capabilities are appropriately bounded right from the beginning. Bridget talked about this in her presentation really well earlier. Balance the urge to be the answer for everything, and make your senior stakeholders really happy, and balance that with what your team can actually accomplish and do a good job at, without needing to burn the candle at both ends. There's somebody described to me one time as the hippo problem, which is the highest paid person's opinion. Don't always have to skew to that. Even the CISO can be wrong about things. If there are any CISOs on the call, not you specifically. But they have CTI teams to tell them and challenge them on their assumptions about various different topics that are going on, right? we joke there's like I looked at the past of kind of like the CNN factor, right? Like a headline will splash across the screen, and then suddenly within 5 minutes, there'll be an email or a message coming from somebody in the executive leadership, like, "Hey, I saw this, and what are we doing about it?" Right? Being prepared to be able to answer those questions and have a system in place to handle those inbounds, validate them, get what information we need, and then push that answer back upward. Really, they're looking for something that can help calm their nerves. If they're even getting asked by somebody else higher in the organization or a peer or something like that, just being able to have a good answer about what this means. And sometimes that is, hey, we're looking into it. It doesn't always have to be, yeah, we know exactly everything about this because we're really awesome and the CTI team is well spending every single dollar you're giving us, right? It's just we've got a process in place for how to do things. And I've definitely been in the situations in the past where all of those inbounds, depending on what's going on, like right now with Team PCP going after every supply chain ever, those inbounds are just coming in at such a rapid pace that need a structure built to here's where we're going to do this. We're going to put out a little bulletin. This will help satisfy a lot of people's questions for the time being. We're looking into it. So, we take that approach within our organization. And then I think that's something that can be well replicated in, customer organizations that have that same kind of phenomenon going on. Just to calm the nerves, let people know you're looking into it, and then they'll know what to expect from you coming forward.
Awesome. Thanks. Bridget, anything to add about kind of helping work with those small teams?
Yeah, I think Will made some great points there for sure. And I think, yeah, it is trying to, in a way, keep those boundaries in place and try not to be constantly just reactive to things that are happening or to requests that are coming in because that's it. Like sometimes things make headlines, and obviously, like the Team PCP stuff is pretty big problem at the moment. But sometimes things make headlines that are very splashy or maybe make the kind of people at the top of the business panic a bit. But in reality, it's maybe not something that, you as a CTI team can in ways do a whole lot about, or maybe it's just not really as big an issue as perhaps it might be being presented as in the media in reality. So I think kind of trying to keep those boundaries in place and trying to just, I suppose, respond and do what you can, but not just allow your entire operation to be derailed by these kind of, I mean, you kind of constantly get different requests or different asks from people. And I suppose you have to try and keep those boundaries in place because, as the survey points out, and as I think we probably all have lived experience of, most teams are small, so there is only so much that you can do. And I guess it is about, I suppose, leveraging the tools we have now as well, like AI. I mean, AI can be used so effectively to, I suppose, especially for things like, as we said, like, summarizing things or drawing out kind of like the more complicated data or drawing out lists of IOCs or these things. But also, I suppose that we don't allow it to be used to kind of just churn everything out. I mean, I think that temptation will probably happen where AI is used to produce reports, and it's just like then there's just so much content or so much information coming out, but then we don't know what is actually useful information. So I think it's kind of trying to just keep in mind what the aim is, what we're trying to achieve as a team and what our priorities are, and not get constantly distracted by many other things that are always going on. Oh, you're
I was
muted,
muted.
Rebecca. There you are.
And we have just a few minutes left. We did just have a question that popped in. So thank you, Andrew, for asking our first question. And we'll end this panel on this question. So let's start. Well, Bridget, since you're already unmuted, we'll start with you. So what is the best way to connect and integrate your CTI team with your DFIR, your digital forensics incident response, and the SOC team?
Gosh, I don't know if there's kind of a straightforward answer for that. I think it's, I suppose, you need to keep those lines of communication open all the time, and I suppose an awareness of what you're both trying to achieve and both are what all the teams are trying to achieve and trying to do and how you can kind of bring that work together. But I think it very much depends on the setup within your organization. So I don't know if there's kind of a blanket answer for that. I'm afraid, but Will or Matt might have some more insight that they could offer as well.
Absolutely. Will, I saw you came off mute. You want
Sure,
any
yeah,
advice
I
there?
could offer something. So I think if a CTI team's only communication with their stakeholders is through the reporting and the dissemination and kind of the finished products, I think there's a really big missed opportunity there. If you're, distributed, have regular calls and catch-ups. It doesn't always have to be about work. It can just be about establishing that rapport with other people in the organization. CTI team should want to be everybody's friend and make every other team look as good as they can, because when they look good, they'll come back to you for more, and that just creates a virtuous cycle in terms of demand signal. I've been in organizations where I've seen the vulnerability management process, for example, is vulnerability management team will say, "Hey, IT folks, you've got 100 CVEs here. I want them patched by next Tuesday." Just not going to happen. You're not going to make any friends coming up with that approach, right? But being able to go to them and say, "I can now describe to you, these couple of CVEs are being used by this particular ransomware actor. They tend to break in by using a CVE in our deployed VPN solution that we have right now. And then what they do is they lock up our VM infrastructure and they want us to pay money for it, right? Now I'm speaking their language. I've identified hopefully a manageable number of CVEs that IT owners can get behind in terms of deciding, hey, you know what, this is important enough. I'm going to stay up all night to take down a system that's in production so I can patch it so that we're protected against this going into the future. That kind of relationship establishment, I think, can be super valuable. And there are some times where we don't take enough advantage of that rapport building to get everything moved across the line that we need to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we are at time for the panel. And I do think CTI should be everyone's friend is a great note to end this panel on. Thank you all so much for sharing your insight, sharing your experiences, sharing more information about your organizations and how they can help support CTI teams, especially when we're dealing with things like small teams, a need to scale, and growing needs. All right. So thank you all so much. And we're just going to keep moving straight along. This has been already like such a wonderful way for me to spend my morning. I hope you all joining us online are enjoying it as well. Keep those questions coming. And I'm going to pass it over to Dan from Data Miner.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Love what I'm hearing so far today. My name's Dan, VP Product Marketing at Data Miner, formerly 10 years with Threat Connect. And today, what I want to talk about, if I can advance my slides, is how we go from the data that comes in via CTI to actually getting decisions made at the organizational level. And one theme that emerges for me from the survey is that problem isn't CTI. CTI, good. What happens is we have struggles with connection. And by that, I don't mean, technological connections, although I know that's a challenge. I mean a different kind of connection that I'll cover by going through first 3 findings from the survey, 3 questions that every CISO actually asks that CTI needs to be able to answer. And I know CISOs, as Rebekah and Andreas talked about before, was a big theme in the survey. And then what is kind of the inevitable conclusion of these findings? Where are things actually going? And I want to first talk about Star Wars, because I believe that threat intelligence needs to be like the Force. It needs to flow through everything. The SOC, vulnerability management, DFIR, detection engineering, the board. But there's a nuance to the Force. The Force is not just something that exists out there in the universe. The Force is inside of us as well. And one thing that I saw emerge from the survey is that we're still focused very externally. We're not looking inward at our own assets, our own controls, and really fusing the external and the internal force together. So I want to first talk about what I see as a collection paradox. Collection of CTI is really designed to give us foresight. What is happening out there so that we can act on it before something bad happens? So we're collecting more than ever. Of course, 82% of intel comes from OSINT, 49 from social. The diversity of collection has never been higher. And yet we're seeing data that says that most breaches are being found by somebody other than the victim. So the problem is not that we're collecting data. In fact, some of my favorite CTI analysts are data hoarders, and I say that as a huge compliment. So the problem is not that we are bringing in not enough data or the wrong data, because again, diversity is up across the board. One of my personal favorites is that we're seeing incident response data increasingly feed CTI programs. One customer told me years ago that their best feed is their incident response team. So teams are maturing. But the problem is all of these sources are still living in their own tool, their own team, in their own format. And nowhere is that more prevalent than external collection and things like internal exposure. What are my assets? What are my vulnerabilities? And so what happens is more collection just becomes more noise. So it's not a volume problem. It's our ability to connect those external insights to what is actually happening in our internal environment. The second gap is around focus. So we're bringing in all this data. We're finding all these vulnerabilities. What do we actually hone in on and address first? So I, quote unquote, love this disconnect. I hate this disconnect, but I love that it emerged in the data. So people are saying that CTI is very valuable, but only 26% are saying that it's influencing decisions. It's like when I tell my aunt at Thanksgiving that I love her green bean casserole, but I don't actually eat any of it. So this is not a problem this is not a failure of CTI teams. They're doing their best to show this impact. And I think Rebekah early on made this comment around CTI has arrived, but it's struggling to show that impact. And the problem is CTI teams aren't being given the tools that they need to answer actual CISO questions, which really boil down to these three. What's our exposure? So not just a list of CVEs, but who is targeting us? And what do we have internally that is actually exposed to what they are targeting? Two is what's the likely financial impact? Or if you're in the government or nonprofit sector, what is the mission impact? So how do we tie our CTI that's coming in to the needles that the CISO actually cares about, i.e. financial impact? And three, what do we do next? So not just we are aware of this threat, but what is our specific defensible next move before the opportunity to address it closes? And the only way you can really know your next move, again, is by knowing your own internal posture, your internal assets, your internal controls. So it's not just about knowing that this threat actor is targeting your industry or whatever. It's about knowing that they are targeting something that, oh, you happen to have a vulnerable version of. And most CTI teams are struggling to answer these questions on demand, and it's certainly not for lack of effort. Speaking of lack of effort, the scale problem. So we talked about foresight, we talked about focus. Those things are not connecting to actual action. So everyone's talked about this so far. The fact that CTI teams are running with fewer than 4 people. And this number has been flat. I guess silver lining, flat is better than going down. But again, the workload they have to support is going way up. And in a way, that's a good thing because, again, threat intelligence is like the force. It should flow through everything. So CTI teams are connecting to more and more teams. But while their mission is going up, the resources they have to hit that mission, to fulfill it, is not. But there is opportunity here. We do see AI adoption, and that is fantastic. But one thing we're seeing is the way AI is being used today, taking up the grunt work, doing the summarization. That's great, and it takes away a lot of that grunt work. But the way the AI is used is descriptive. It's summarizing large volumes of data, but it's not decisive. It's telling you what happened, like, hey, APT29 is exploiting CVE 123. It's not answering questions like what that actually means to us. What is it going to cost? What do we do next? It's not, and we don't want to take humans out of the loop. We want to bring human judgment here. But AI needs to be able to serve up those decisive answers to the analyst on a silver platter. So providing relevant recommendations, tailoring what's happening to your individual organization. So all the things we see at the bottom of this graph are the things that AI needs to evolve to actually do. So what do we actually do about all this? Well, the good news is the industry is converging on something that might help. And it's called Unified Cyber Risk Intelligence. And this is something that Gartner is pushing. And put very simply, it's about creating a data fabric that consists not just of external sources, which we see are legion between OSINT, social media, whatever, and internal sources, your own controls, your attack surface, your detection trends, and correlating that in a way that is, one, aligned to actual business objectives, and two, can be leveraged downstream by the stakeholders of threat intelligence. So it's about unifying the external force and the force inside of you and letting it be acted on downstream. So that those actions are not based on guesswork or static CVSS scores. They're based on what is actually in your environment and how it correlates to those external threats. So what do we actually do at DataMiner? So we take external sources like intelligence feeds, like dark web chatter, and we've built an entire set of specialized LLMs that are designed to monitor those things faster than traditional feeds, faster than we see vulnerabilities typically reported. We're connected to those dark web forums. We are connected to geopolitical events. We even bring in data from things like traffic cameras. And we connect those to your internal sources. So what are your vulnerabilities? What controls do you already have in place? And we're able to answer questions like, for those external threats, what is the actual financial risk to you? What vulnerabilities should you tackle first based on the risks to your specific organization? And we provide agentic automation that lets those things be acted on downstream. And as a vendor, I would love to say that downstream automation does everything autonomously. It patches and remediates everything. But we don't actually want that. We still want humans in the judgment loop. So what we do is we take that internal-external fusion and we serve it up to the analyst on a silver platter so they can decide, do I want to actually push that big red button? So what we provide, and I should have included a screenshot here because that makes it concrete, my apologies. We provide, among other things, an overlay that sits on your desktop. And it's constantly telling you what is happening out there. So APT29 is being seen exploiting CVE 123 and your external environment. So hey, CVE 123 happens to live in your environment. And by the way, it doesn't just live in your environment. It lives in a production asset that is internet facing. And we do that through things like integrations with Wiz, with your vulnerability scanners. And then we also provide financial information. So that production asset exposed to that vulnerability, because you don't have the right compensating controls in place, represents a $1.2 million risk to your organization. And here that is ranked against your other vulnerabilities. And then we provide predictive insights. So based on that vulnerability, based on what you have, we predict a 97% chance of lateral movement or data exfiltration, whatever your favorite attack technique happens to be, or I guess whatever that threat actor's favorite attack technique happens to be. So then we basically give you a button to send that downstream to take that agentic action. So it's all about taking that external data, that internal data, tying it together, and prioritizing it by business impact. So it's not just serving up a threat landscape report to the CISO. It's about serving up a threat landscape report that correlates those threats to your internal environment in a language that the CISO and the board, because they're involved in this, actually speak, which is things like dollars and mission impact. And so I'm paraphrasing Rebekah here. CTI has landed. It's arrived. It's been a 10 or 15-year scramble to get there, but CTI has won the argument for its existence. The next struggle, the actual wins that CTI teams are going to see over the next few years, is demonstrating the impact. And this goes back to those 3 questions that I mentioned. CTI needs to be able to answer what is coming and what it costs. So again, not just that there are threat actors targeting our industry or even our assets. It's about what is that actually going to cost, because it's not just about crown jewels. Your crown jewels might be very well defended. You might have a second tier asset that simply doesn't have the right compensating controls in place. And so that represents a much larger financial risk. And then finally, what do we actually do about it? So connecting all of those dots is how CTI is actually going to get to the next level. So again, it's about feeling the external force, but it's also feeling the force inside you so that those insights can flow to the rest of the team. So thank you very much. I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion. I will pass the mic.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your amazing green bean casserole analogy as well. I think I'm going to start using that one because that resonated. And also the question you suggested asking on your slide there, like what's the next hour of work?
Yeah.
That is something I'm going to take away as well, because you're right. It's not just the cost in money, but it's the cost in time.
Yes.
And yes, so I am fantastic. I'm looking forward to our panel discussion as well. But for now, we're going to hop into our next speaker, Enzar.
Yes.
Perfect. All right, I'll let you take things away.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. And yeah, I also loved what I feel here so far. It is great. I also want to see those agents that Tel was talking about. It was so cute. So good morning and good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are located, to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ansar. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at SocRadar. I am also the VP of Research. So today I want to talk about something many of us already know instinctively in cybersecurity and threat intelligence. CTI is no longer optional. The value is obvious. The challenge is now is efficiency. So the security teams are overwhelmed with data, overwhelmed with alerts, and often operating with very limited resources. And meanwhile, threat actors are scaling faster than ever using automation and AI. That's what I call is unfair game. So for us, it is a duty, it is a job, and we get monthly salaries as defenders. Uh, but for attackers, for threat actors, it's a passion, and they make lots of money when they breach, when they say data. We see some strange things on dark web as well. I am closely monitoring the dark web as a CISO. As you know, there are some corporations between Bridge Forum, Team PCP, Lapsus. They make an announcement today. They bridge GitHub. They are selling the source code repository. They asked for $50,000. The offer was $95,000, and at one point they removed the post, and we thought the data was sold already. And we are also most very closely monitoring the Iranian and Israeli conflict. There are some interesting things happening in that field as well. We see Iranian intelligence using Telegram very efficiently and effectively. They create bots and they even do the recruitment. I also get involved. I was curious, like I asked a couple of questions. I said I have important intel. I like to share. I just want to make sure I'm talking to Iranian intelligence. And they asked a couple of questions. I asked a couple of questions. They asked a couple of questions. Of course, at some point, I have to finish the conversation. Of course, I recorded and informed the CISA and FBI immediately all this events and the details. And the real question we are asking today is how the CTI teams do more without endless increasing handcounts. Doesn't matter, like for example, we have also some Fortune 500 companies, their security teams are very big. But it doesn't matter how big or small is the security team, they are always overloaded. They are always had to do many things at the same time, unfortunately. And this presentation is about, again, yeah, we have to talk about AI in every meeting, and agentic AI and AI-driven workflow can help CTI teams to move from simply collecting intelligence to actually operationalizing it at scale. All right, so let's start with the current state of the CTI based on the 2026 SANS survey. So the first thing is that stand out is the CTI has already won the value argument. So 91% of the CISO say CTI is valuable or extremely valuable. That's massive validation for the industry. And the 83% say they understand the threats targeting their organization or industry. So awareness is improving. But then we hit a very important number. Only 26% say CTI significantly influences their decision. And that's the disconnect. So organizations are consuming intelligence. They believe in intelligence, but many still struggle to translate intelligence into the operational action. So the question become, where exactly is the gap between intelligence conception and intelligence-driven decision making? And in my opinion, the answer is not lack of data. The answer is lack of operational efficiency, because we already see lots of data is sharing already dark web. There are too many data, too much data. And with the help of AI, we can be faster and more efficient. But still, the problem is not data itself, it is the operation, as long as that's based on my experiences. And in this slide, I wanted to highlight, I personally call the dark data problem. So most CTI teams are drowning in partially processed or completely untouched intelligence. So unread vendor feeds, unprocessed OSINT, and alerts that analysts simply do not have time to review. And incident response artifacts sitting unused, and social media indicators ignored because there's so no scalable way to operationalize them. So the survey shows that almost 50% of daily alerts and tasks remain incomplete. And at the same time, 60%, 62% of the security teams operate with the fewer than 4 full-time employees. So we have imbalance between the amount of intelligence available and the human capacity required to process it. So the issue is not whether intelligence exists, the issue is whether analysts have time to convert intelligence into the action before it becomes irrelevant. Um, and honestly, most analysts today spend too much time on repetitive operational tasks instead of high-value analytical work. And this is also valid for us. For example, when we do a demo or POC, as Socrates, we have so many features and capabilities. And of course, our technical engineers or sales team want to explain every single feature, every single capability. And I was listening those demos and POCs. I said, guys, on the other hand, there are people, they are not excited about the capabilities or the features. For them, that's extra job. Okay. The main point we have to make it, this platform is going to make your job easier, not harder. That's what they want to hear, because again, they're already overloaded. They're already doing too many things at the same time. More features, more capabilities, more actions. It is just extra job for their workflow. And the scale problem is getting worse very quickly, according to the Verizon Dibber comparison. Confident breaches increased from roughly 2,100 in 2015 to more than 12,000 in 2025. That's like 475% increase over 10 years. So at the same time, what we see is identities are becoming primary attack vector. That's one of the biggest challenge for 2006, I guess, because AI also in the middle of this discussion has non-human identity, but still have identity. I was able to join many meetings, face-to-face meeting with the CISOs, fellow CISOs. So the biggest concern, as far as today, at least, the non-human identities, because they are not humans, they are systems, but at the same time, they have identities. And not just human identities, but also, again, non-human identities, API identities, service accounts, and increasingly agentic identities. Connected AI systems are getting very challenged for the people in the security field. So threat actors themselves are also adapting AI aggressively. Again, I have too many use cases from dark web, how they use AI very effectively and efficiently. That's why we are talking about ransomware 3.0, right? So what it means basically, so let's say you know how to drive a car, but you don't know anything about how to take care of the car, right? You go to the taxi company and I say, I want to make some money by driving and I have driver license, but I have no idea how to take care of car. So basically they give you the car and you make same money and you share the profit, right? So this is basically how ransomware as a service works. And with ransomware 3.0, you say you go to the taxi company and you say, I have no idea how to drive a car. I have no idea how to take care of a car, but still I want to make money. Is something available for me? And they give you an autonomous car. So basically, you don't even have to know how to drive a car. All you need to do is just sitting there. I think Tesla also started this in Texas. Like if you call a Tesla car in Texas, uh, it is driverless. There's no driver, but there's someone sitting on the passenger seat next to the driver just to make sure everything is safe and secure. So basically, yeah, you don't even need to know how to drive a car with the ransomware 3.0. You don't have to know anything about ransomwares. You don't need to know anything about how to do transactions with the crypto or programming, advanced red teaming attacks. So in other words, attackers are scaling operationally faster than defenders. And because of that, the CTI teams cannot rely on the traditional manual workflows anymore. If defenders stay human speed while attackers become machine speed, the gap will continue to widen. And this is where AI become important, but not necessarily in the way many people initially imagined. Currently, AI adoption in many organizations is still very basic. An analyst opens an LLM manually and asks a question, copies data from tools, and receive a generic answer with the limited context. And the workflow is still heavily human dependent. But the feature shift is different. Instead of AI acting like a chatbot, AI begins acting like a continuously operating assistant or agent. And agents can run 24 hours and 7 days. They can pull data automatically. They can integrate securely with your environment. They can prioritize findings based on the business context and responses and exposures. And most importantly, they can remove repetitive operational burden from analysts. So this is basically can replace tier one analyst in SOC team. And I want to emphasize something important here. This is not about replacing analysts totally because the goal is to elevate analysts and take more strategic decisions than repetitive tasks. So human remains possible for validation, decision making, and strategic thinking. And AI simply helps to reduce operational friction and reclaim analyst time. I think it was the SANS they first mentioned about the offensive SOC, just because we know SLC is basically, maybe I'm talking too sharp, but yeah, basically SLC is dying. And to make it more interesting, we are trying to find maybe different terminologies like offensive AI, offensive SOC, I'm sorry. So the reason behind mentioning about offensive SOC because most people want to do offensive capabilities or they want to do strategic decisions or validations and strategic thinking or decision making instead of just doing repetitive tasks, right? And even though AI receive enormous attention, adoption like CTI operations still surprisingly limited and only 45% report actively using AI today, and while 55% either do not use it or unaware of how it is being used. And honestly, many of the concerns are understandable. A lot of security professionals still see LLMs as a chatty search engines, and they require very good prompts. They often lack direct integration with the live threat intelligence, and by themselves, they usually cannot take action. But the direction of the market is very clear. AI is moving from experimental to operational. So we are shifting from summarization use cases toward the task automation and workflow orchestration. So instead of simply generating reports faster, AI will increasingly help analysts investigate faster, enrich faster, and correlate faster and prioritize faster. So the analyst still stays in the loop, but now the analysts operate with the significantly greater efficiency. And at Socradar, our focus also has been to make threat intelligence operation actionable rather than simply informational. And that's why with the involvement of AI, threat intelligence platform should be um, not just proactive but also predictive, right? Um, the Matt also said from us that they have some websites sharing research reports and details, and many threat intelligence companies they share lots of useful information for free, right? So those are very important, critical for community, and the reason I mentioned this just because. Um, this information sharing with the community plays a critical and important role because those information has some important clues, predictions about how trend landscape is changing. And today we also doing this webinar to share our experiences and insights to tell actually how the trend landscape is changing. What are the new TTPs? What are the new methodologies used by threat actors? Not just telling your data is breached, right? How they are using AI more effectively and efficiently. That's why we published a report 2 days ago. We actually use the tools by for research purposes, of course, used by the threat actors, and we create a report, and it is available publicly on our website. How actual threat actors using those tools, and again, they're using very efficient and very creative tools. I highly recommend to take a look at that report. So there are three major areas we focus on SOC Radar. First, our MCP server capability, which securely connects AI and LLM systems to live threat intelligence, and this enables prompt-based integration, analysis, reporting, and guidance using real operational data. And second is agentic AI workflows. These are purpose-built workflows where agents handle repetitive and time-sensitive tasks under the human supervision. Like analysts remain fully in the control, but operational efficiency improves dramatically. And the third is extended threat intelligence. One of the biggest problems is security today is fragmentation across the attack surface management, digital risk protection, cyber threat intelligence, and exposure management tools. So by unifying these domains, organizations can get better context, faster enrichment, and more actionable prioritization. The goal is not simply collecting more intelligence, the goal is enabling analysts to make meaningful action with the less operational overhead. And I do have an AI use case, so let's walk through a practical example. Imagine an organization discover a compromised machine. So traditional analysts might spend hours manually pulling logs from the multiple SIEMs, checking breach database, mapping the affected systems and writing the risk reports manually. The process can easily take 3 hours or more. Now, compare that to agentic workflow. So the agent automatically ingests session cookies or credentials and correlates them against large-scale Stealer logs, intelligence maps affected users and machines, and identifies potential blast radius and generates a ready to action risk assessment report. So instead of 3 hours, the process can take 3 minutes. So the time difference matters enormously during the active incidents. And also because the speed directly affects the containment, exposure, reduction, and the operational resilience. So the takeaway to close a summary situation this, the CTI has already proven its value. That debate is over, right? Even the top like ISO 27001 standards frameworks, they involve CTI way before their framework. So now the challenge is operational impact. Security teams do not necessarily need to more raw intelligence feeds. They need better ways to operationalize intelligence efficiently. And the future analysts are going to be take also necessary actions, all this. So again, with the AI involvement, the process is going to be much more faster. The response is going to be much more faster. But again, that doesn't mean it is going to replace the human analyst. Still, as everyone mentioned on this their speech as well, humans has to be in the loop. So we need people, still analysts in the loop, to make sure the AI outcomes are still reliable and accurate, because we depend on AI so much maybe, but at the same time, with the small problems, AI can provide a very unnecessary or uh, not useful information at all. So for even for basic questions, the response could be very horrifying. Yeah, so terrible. So that's why we need still humans in the process. And with the involvement of AI, again, CTI can do a much better job, much efficient job, and much great job, I believe. And thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to our panel discussion because I have some follow-up questions for you on that as well. But for now, I will pass it over to Eric to wrap up our final speaker, and then we'll go into our panel.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well today. My name's Eric Clay. I have a weird title. I'm the co-lead of threat intelligence research, and I also do marketing at Flare, so I do a little bit of both. And today we're going to be talking about adversary in the middle phishing attacks. So I'm very excited to jump straight in. We could go to the next slide, please. Or I believe you guys are going to be controlling the slides. Thank you. I wanted to double check. So we're going to be talking about the era of vibe-coded cybercrime, which is a really, really interesting topic. And we're going to be especially talking about this in the lens of adversary in the middle phishing. And so first, I wanted to show this slide because I really do believe this. Identity is the frontier of cybercrime. And what we mean by that is cyber criminals have basically used identity at various stages from the 2010s onwards to breach companies. And so it started with what you would consider traditional credential leaks. So, a third-party application gets breached, all the credentials leak out onto the dark web, threat actors take those credentials and they replay them to gain access. These got repackaged into combo lists. Threat actors would use combo lists to specifically try to target specific geographies, specific businesses, etc. I don't know how we, there we go. Thank you. Then we've moved on to the era of phishing kits. So phishing kits are basically where a threat actor will set up a web page. Often these are sold on the dark web and on Telegram channels. Then the victim puts in their credentials into the phishing kit. The threat actor gets the credentials, and then obviously the threat actor can use those to take over an email account or something else. We often see these with Office 365 attacks, etc. Now, the era that we're in now, though, is really different because the two-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication and adoption has been so uniform and so rapid. Threat actors are now really focused on the session, replaying the session either through sessions stolen from info stealer logs or now also sessions stolen through adversary in the middle phishing kits. And so that's kind of one lens to look at AITM kits through is this is a new method, or at least a new-ish method of session theft, which can be used for corporate account takeover. And I'll be talking a little bit about some data we have on that here shortly. And then there's kind of a second element here that I think is also worth noting, which is adversary in the middle phishing kits are also one of the first probably and most successful instances that we've seen of AI being used in cybercrime in kind of a real structural operational way that is actually yielding thousands and thousands of account takeovers for cyber criminals. And so it's kind of this interesting dual lens where now we have this hybrid challenge of identity and also the cybercrime, sorry, identity and AI being used in a real structural way for cybercrime. I am actually, there we go. So let's go over the attack chain. I'm not actually quite sure what's happening with my slides here. I apologize.
Eric, you have remote control over them. I'm not sure. I'm not touching the screen or advancement.
Okay.
So
No worries. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. I had such a great flow going too. So let's talk about the attack chain for adversary in the middle phishing. So first, we're going to go over to like the kind of like intro here is there's a different email for every single role in the org chart. And so this is actually one of the first kind of wide scale uses of AI in cybercrime. So what a phishing kit is fundamentally is a threat actor sells the infrastructure, the HTML page, etc. And then other threat actors purchase this infrastructure. And so the two most recent examples are Evil Tokens and Kali 365. And then they start sending out phishing emails. Now, in the kit that the threat actors are selling, one of the most interesting uses of AI is they're now customizing phishing emails based on the individual's role in the business. And they're using open source models primarily for this. But for instance, if you work in accounting, you may get a different phishing email from Evil Tokens than if you work in finance or legal. And so this is one of the first examples we've seen of this kind of like widespread social engineering attacks. So first you get this kind of email that's like very specific to your role. Now, the link doesn't go through a phishing page. You go directly to a phishing page. First, it gets routed through a few different things to make it look legitimate and to also reduce the effectiveness of blocking IPs and domains. So you'll often see it get rerouted through a Cloudflare worker, a Vercel function, AWS Lambda, before landing on the actual phishing page. And every hop sits at a domain that your organization is likely going to natively trust. Even further in this, which I think is really interesting, they will actually look for they will look for instances that this may be a test environment or that this may be security testing, and they'll actually just redirect to Google if one of these turns out to be true. So what actually happens? Basically, here I'm going to actually skip this slide, I think, and move one slide further. Let's see, sorry. All right, well, we'll stick with the slide. So basically, the attacker sits in the middle here. So that when the user sees kind of a legitimate Microsoft 360 Office page or a legitimate page for multiple different websites, Office 365 is what we see being targeted really, really, really heavily right now. And when the user inputs their information into that page, that information is then proxied over to actual Microsoft. So they put in their username, password, it proxies to Microsoft. It then prompts them for the two-factor authentication code. They put in the two-factor authentication code. They end up actually being redirected to legitimate Microsoft. But then the threat actor then has a session, which usually lasts about 15 minutes, and the username and password for the victim. And from there, they do a couple of different things. One of the most common things we've been seeing attackers do is they will actually log into the user's Microsoft account and create a bot, which is essentially kind of like a Microsoft API for a third-party application that enables, like a smart TV is probably a good example of this. And from there, they can configure rules on this bot in the Microsoft account to auto forward all of the user's emails back to the phishing infrastructure. It's actually a very pernicious and hard to detect thing, because even if the user goes and resets their username, password, even if they reset their 2FA code, there's still this bot that's basically sitting in their account, proxying all of their emails back to the attacker. So yeah, and this is just kind of going over that. The attacker is installing a backdoor before the alert fires. And so even again, with the reset of the credentials, you're not really ending up solving the problem. So then what we see is that this is another area where AI is used. So the victim's mailbox is now auto-forwarding things to the attacker. And then the attackers are using regular expression and AI, kind of a mix of both, to look for things like wire, invoice, accounts payable, vendor payment, confidential. They have a whole list of keywords that they're actively scanning every single email the victim is receiving for because, and then they're kind of using they're using Telegram groups and channels to notify them like, hey, Lucy from accounting at XYZ company just got an email that has accounts payable in it. So it's kind of interesting because you're seeing AI as like this glue that's where it's not AI carrying out the attack, it's AI being used in each step of the attack chain with adversary in the middle phishing. Yeah, so you'll see one of the other findings, and I believe this was from Arctic Wolf, although I would have to confirm, is they actually believe that the phishing infrastructure and phishing kits were vibe coded initially using AI. They're using AI for pre-attack reconnaissance. They're using AI for lure generation. They're using AI for building the templates and the landing pages. They're using AI for post-attack reconnaissance, and they're even using AI for thread identification. So AI is really kind of like the glue that's sitting between every single layer of these attacks, and which is causing them to be more effective. Now, there's a second variant of this that I want to briefly cover, which is basically device code phishing. And so I mentioned earlier that they're often setting up an additional bot or a device in the Microsoft account that is then able to forward messages out of the account, the email account. But the other thing that they're doing here is they are actually like basically having the user add a Microsoft device to their account without realizing it as part of the phishing attack. So you end up, the verification code is actually a real Microsoft OAuth device code. And so it says, hey, user, you're going to be setting up, to open this document, you need to get this verification code from Microsoft. The phishing kit requests the verification code for Microsoft to add a device. The user then has to put in their version of the code. They continue to Microsoft, and they've actually added a malicious device onto their Microsoft account. So we recommend a bunch of different preventions for these. First of all, enforce phishing resistant MFA, FIDO2 YubiKeys, anything that's not just SMS or sessions hardware is best. Conditional access on every session. Auditing OAuth apps and device registrations on corporate Microsoft accounts is really, really valuable. Blocking device login from unmanaged endpoints. Monitoring leaked sessions and combo lists. There is an element to this where just like monitoring the dark web and Telegram is effective, at least for finding kind of post-compromise indicators. And then using a token revocation runbook, you should build a process for this. Now, this is kind of one of the reasons I'm talking about this today, and one of the reasons this is so concerning is the number, the sheer volume that we see in this. So right now, we see about almost 7,000 organizations have been infected. Are affected by this. I shouldn't say infected, it's not malware. And about 10,000 are going on 10,000 unique users at these companies have been affected, with about 500,000 plus emails being sent out. We do have a list of victim companies and domains that we've found in some Telegram groups. And so we are actually working with Microsoft right now on trying to basically trying to reset these at scale. But if people want to message, I don't have a much better way to do this at the moment, than if people want to email me after the fact, I'm also happy to run your domain and see if you have users compromised. We can share my domain or my email address in the chat. But this is a very, very large scale attack. There's hundreds of threat actors using this phishing kit, and you've ended up with like very, very widespread compromise. I will say one last piece here, why there's 9,600 users but 6,800 organizations, is we often see threat actors sending out phishing emails from their own. Once they compromise an inbox, they'll often send kind of internal phishing emails to try to get more users involved. We've seen some organizations with up to 10 or 15 users compromised simultaneously. So yeah, that is it for me. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you
Sorry
so
about
much.
the slides.
Yeah, no, that is a issue. I couldn't even see the slides when we started, so you're good. You're good.
Rebekah, can I actually do my 1 minute flare pitch? I forgot I had that slide.
Oh, yep, go for it.
Maybe 30
Go
seconds.
We have time. Yep.
Yeah, so the last thing I'll say is Flare is a threat intelligence platform that's very focused on stopping breaches, preventing account takeover attacks, ransomware attacks. We have an industry-leading data set of Stealer logs, credentials. We also are used by advanced fraud and abuse teams for dark web monitoring, Telegram monitoring, et cetera, and we do all of our own data collection. We also have a free trial, so if you're interested in a free trial, the free trial would also give you access to the data I said you could email me for, so that may be more efficient than emailing me because I'm not very good at emailing. But the bonus of not being very good at emailing is I also won't get phished. So please do give our free trial a shot if it's of interest and you think it may be beneficial. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, that is a good, I guess, an upside of not being good at email is these phishing kits will not be effective against you. But let's jump into our final panel discussion, which will wrap up our CTI survey webinar for the day. So several, I know Dan and Eric, I heard both of you talking specifically around like collection sources and how in response to kind of how these adversaries are changing, your collection sources themselves are changing. And that's something we also saw as a result of the survey. And so we can start with Dan. I think you had mentioned specifically like ingesting even like license plate reader type information. But how do you decide what to include in your collection? And have you seen any, I guess, notable shifts aside from kind of the shifts we saw in the survey, just through your own experience with data collection for CTI?
Sure. And yeah, since you mentioned the traffic cameras, interesting. We're seeing a lot of physical cyber or cyber physical convergence, which is very exciting and I think will be very helpful. In terms of the collection, what really needs to guide it is business priority. And I know we're supposed to be talking about the 2026 survey. I want to talk about the 2025 survey, where one thing that was really exciting, there was a huge amount of growth in executives and cyber defenders getting into the room together. Because really things like PIRs, which are meant to drive collection requirements, really need to flow from the business. And that's such an important part of, again, CTI showing its impact, fighting for influence. Because if they can align those PIRs to things like dollar figures by looking at things like their own internal assets, well, that's going to help show that impact. And maybe, finally, CTI teams will get the budget to raise that FTE count above the 4 that it's been stuck at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So going back to kind of what problems are you trying to solve and what are those priority intelligence requirements? Absolutely.
Exactly.
Eric, anything to add there?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I've seen at least is when you're trying to pitch even a CISO, but especially a CEO, trying to explain the nuances of, info stealer malware and why you need to invest in a solution to purchase info stealer malware can be quite challenging because unless there's this like level of abstraction that's really difficult when communicating the value of CTI, right? So if you have an analyst may be super familiar with the problem, and then you move up to like an executive and it's like, well, there's this type of malware and it can infect these machines, and then it gets really, really complicated and nuanced. And so I think the really important thing when building value and trying to communicate this type of stuff is to try to find simple analogies and show rather than tell where possible, because I think that's what really, really moves the needle with corporate executives and being able to kind of like demonstrate the value of CTI.
Awesome, thank you. And Enzar, I know you had your example about the like the AI use case and how you can kind of correlate that internal data against external data. Have you seen at all like the collection sources of what you're using to correlate that data shift over maybe the past 18 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, the key question is always, does this data improve attribution? And I think one of the biggest evolution happening right now is the shift from purely external threat intelligence toward the identity-centric and exposure-centric intelligence. So historically, CTI focused heavily on the external indicators, like malware, hashes, IPs, domains, threat actor infrastructure, or dark web chatter, things like that. Those are still important, but now the organizations are realizing that the external intelligence becomes much more powerful when it is correlated against internal contacts. For example, leaked credentials by themselves are not always actionable, but if you can automatically correlate those credentials against active employees, privileged accounts, exposed software as a service environments, session cookies, or VPN usage patterns, suddenly the intelligence become operational critical. And we are also seeing much more emphasis on telemetry tied to the identities across behavior, cloud assets, exposed APIs, non-human identities, and even AI-related infrastructure. because attackers are increasingly targeting identities rather than only endpoints. So yes, the collection model is evolving significantly. It is becoming less about isolated IOCs collection and more about contextual intelligence correlation across internal and external ecosystem. And honestly, that is where AI and agentic AI workflows become very valuable, not because AI magically replaces analysts, but because correlation at that scale becomes extremely difficult to do manually in the real time.
Yeah, the identity issue is a big one. And again, I think Eric, you mentioned, they're not installing malware necessarily. They're trying to get access to accounts and get access to different types of identity information that's going to help enable follow-on attacks. And so, how do you move from collecting that information? So now we have information about what the attackers are doing, how they're doing it. How do you actually take that and use CTI to make it actionable? I guess we
Yeah.
can start. I don't know who wants to start. Eric, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned me at the top of the question, so I assumed it was follow through. So I'll go, but maybe pass it over to Dan after. The so I think that there's like two key things to understand. There's like a tactical or strategic element, which is how are attack patterns changing, and then what controls can you put in place to mitigate these new attack patterns, right? So, for example, with adversary in the middle phishing, there's like very certain attack patterns, right? They're trying to steal sessions primarily. They're trying to replay those sessions. They're trying to add devices to Microsoft accounts. They can send data back out, but you can also see this with InfoStealer malware, where they're running session replay attacks using sessions found in Stealer logs to take over corporate accounts. And so, if session-based theft becomes your CTI team concludes that session-based theft is one of the major risk vectors to your company, there are specific controls you can put in place. For example, you can reduce the length of sessions. You can enable more monitoring for certain accounts, like are people adding devices to Microsoft accounts that may be concerning. And so there's like this like strategic or tactical piece, and then there's like the very operational piece, which is how do we make sure we have really good detection, remediation, and preventing a bigger blast radius when something does happen, because something inevitably always does happen. And so I think it's kind of like the conjunction of these two, getting the right operational intelligence, but also having the right strategic and tactical intelligence to tell you where the landscape is changing so that you can adjust your controls.
Yeah, I think there's really glad, Eric, that you talked about controls, and I'll get to that in a second. But I think there's two factors. The first is sort of a focus and prioritization problem. It's a lot easier to take action, effective action, if you're trying to take action on a specific problem set, like a specific set of vulnerabilities, versus an overwhelming set of vulnerabilities, for example. So once you've focused in, that's where things like the control piece come in. So one of the things we see our customers doing, with Data Miner for cyber defense is, we give them that prioritized list of threats and vulnerabilities by financial or mission impact. So the priority becomes self-evident. This is a $1.2 million risk. It's an exposed production asset tied to this vulnerability that is being actively exploited based on dark web chatter by this threat actor. But what's really key there is part of what our software factors into that is those compensating controls. So part of the reason it's a $1.2 million breach risk is because of a lack of compensating controls based on what we are predicting the attacker is going to do next. And the other thing we also have is you can simulate, again, based on that predictive AI, which new compensating controls will work to effectively play down that risk. So it's not a shotgun approach where we're taking all these actions against all these different threats or trying to figure out what to do about this one priority. It's about actually demonstrating which compensating controls will reduce risk the most and by how much. So it's predicting those actions before you actually take them.
And is there anything to add there?
Sure, yeah. I think that's actually the most important challenge in CTI today, moving from visibility to operational action, because intelligence by itself does not reduce risk, action does. So once we understand attackers' behavior, the next step is translating that intelligence into defensive prioritization and operational workflows. For example, if the CTI identifies a credential exposure tied to the real employee account, the value is not the alert itself. The value is automatically determining, is this account privileged, or does it have VPN access? Is multi-factor authentication enabled? Are there active sessions? Has the identity recently interact with the suspicious infrastructure? So that contextualizing is what turns raw intelligence into the actionable intelligence. And honestly, this is where many organizations still struggle operationally because the process is often fragmented across the CTI teams or access identity access management teams or SOC teams and IR teams. So what we are increasingly seeing is a shift toward from intelligence-driven automation. Instead of analysts manually forwarding alerts between teams, workflows can automatically enrich and prioritize and even trigger predefined response actions. Things like session revocation or password resets, exposure validation, or risk scoring. And again, I want to emphasize the goal is not fully autonomous security. The goal is reducing the time between detection, understanding, and response. This has to be very fast and very quick, especially with the involvement of AI, because the modern attacks, especially identity-based attacks, move extremely fast, sometimes faster than traditional analyst workflow can realistically keep up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the words you said there like jumped out at me about the fragmentation. So we talked, about organizational silos within CTI, but also just like the fragmentation of the response systems and who's doing what and when. And we actually had a follow-up question for you, Dan. I think that touches on that, which is that how does your tool determine what compensating controls are actually in place? So you even kind of know what you're dealing with to begin with.
Good question. So we really look at several things. One is simply we've got decades of private cyber loss data. So that helps our AI actually do the modeling. In terms of where we get those insights, it's through things like integrations. And I don't know if Tal is still on the call, Tal from Wiz, but we are very grateful to our integration partners for providing a lot of those insights. We also work with organizations like FAIR to do the actual risk modeling, if anyone on the call is familiar with that. But we are doing a lot of work through those integrations, through that predictive modeling to actually get to those final outcomes of not just what controls you have in place, but again, that simulation of what if I change that. And part of the reason this is so important is a lot of organizations do that today with things like quarterly audits. And I know everyone on this call knows that quarterly is a lot slower than most things that we deal with actually happen. So what's great with the way we do it through those integrations is it's continuous and real time. So it's not based on a quarterly audit. It's based on what controls you have in place right now.
Awesome. Thank you. Eric or Enzar, any of you have any insight into how you kind of handle that fragmentation issue just with technologies?
Dan, you want to go first?
Oh, I think Dan, go ahead. Eric, did you
And sorry, I'll hand it over to you first, and then I'll go after if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. So yes, absolutely. I think fragmentation is one of the defining operational problem in modern security environments. So most organizations already have security tools, and in many cases, they actually have too many tools. And the challenge is that intelligence, exposure management, identity telemetry, cloud security, or SOC operations and incident response often operate in partially disconnected ecosystem. And attackers benefit from that fragmentation. And they move horizontally across systems while defenders are still trying to correlate information manually between platforms and the teams. So, in my opinion, the future is not necessarily about adding more standalone tools. It is about orchestration, correlation, and contextualized visibility. For example, if the CTI detects leaked credentials again, that information should not remain isolated inside the threat intel dashboard. It should automatically correlate with identity systems, SIM telemetry, exposure sets, cloud environments, and response workflow, because the analyst should not need to pivot manually across 6 or 7 consoles just to understand whether something is truly critical or not. And this is also where extended threat intelligence becomes very important. Like when attack surface management, digital risk protection, vulnerability intelligence, identity intelligence, and threat intelligence operate together, organizations gain a much more realistic understanding of exposure and attacker pathways. I also think agentic AI will help reduce fragmentation operationally, not by replacing existing platforms, but by acting as an orchestration layer between them, helping analysts query systems, correlate findings, and enrich alerts and automate repetitive investigation steps much faster. Because ultimately, defenders do not lose due to the lack of data anymore. They lose because due to the lack of operational speed and coordination.
Yeah, I think there's like one thing I would build on to Insar and Dan's answers, which were both excellent, which is I think that a good threat model for the organization that's continuously updated and that has executive buy-in and that's also communicated across the entire security team, not just the threat intelligence team, not just the security operations team, is a really critical step, right? If you have the threat intel team saying, we're really concerned about session takeover attacks, and this is the big problem, but you have another team over on, security operations is concerned about vulnerability exploitation. Like their number one priority is something completely different. You end up with this disjunction and fragmentation where it's really difficult to coordinate resources effectively. But if you have an entire security team that's bought into the organization's threat model and that's really prioritizing action in an effective way, it makes it much easier to prioritize effectively and get teams to work together and to build good workflows that actually make sense for the business.
Awesome. Thank you. So Enzar, at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking a little bit about some of the new things that we need to monitor as well. And you mentioned like some of the geopolitical conflicts that are going on out there. Is that something that you think is going to continue moving forward? And if so, what are some good data sources to be thinking about for tracking some of those threats?
Great question. Yeah. As you know, Rebecca, there was a ceasefire between United States and Iran at one moment, but there was no ceasefire in cyber world. So the operations was continuously it was continued from both parties, and absolutely, I actually believe geopolitical cyber activity will continue increasing for the foreseeable future. What we are seeing now is the cyber operations have become a permanent layer of geopolitical competition. And importantly, many of these operations stay below the threshold of traditional warfare. That's why I often describe it as operating in a digital gray zone. You have state actors, proxy groups, hacktivists, cyber criminals, and ideological collectives all operating in the overlapping ecosystem. And attribution becomes difficult, motivations become blurred, and operations often align with the geopolitical events in real time. And we have seen this very clearly in the conflict involving Iran, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, and even tension in the Pacific region. And one of the important shifts is that the cyber operations are no longer only targeting governments or military systems. We increasingly see impact against critical infrastructure, logistic providers, cloud services, telecoms, financial institutions, healthcare, and even publicly perception through influence operations. And if you remember, Rebecca, the one of the first targets by Iran is the AWS data center in United Arab Emirates. So they know that's a very critical target. And as for data sources, I think organizations need to much broader intelligence strategy now because threat actors using Telegram very effectively and efficiently. If I'm not wrong, at Socrates, we are monitoring more than 7,000 Telegram channels because not everyone wants to go to dark web, but those threat actors need audience, right? They need to reach out to people. They need to because they're also doing a psychological war. They need to affect the people. So since most people they don't want to go to dark web because they're afraid they're going to be monitored by the law enforcement agencies, or it is illegal to access the dark web. The threat actors using Telegram channels very effectively and efficiently. Others, not much, like Discord, or there are some couple other messaging platforms. But Telegram is one of the biggest source they can monitor. Traditional IOC feeds are still useful, but geopolitical CTI increasingly requires monitoring across. So open source intelligence and regional reportings, important dark web and Telegram ecosystems again, hacktivist channels and propaganda networks, threat actor infrastructure tracking, social media. Of course, always there are great indicators in social media. Sector specific Isaac reports, they are also very useful. And government advisories, of course. CISA is doing a great job. They closely monitor everything. We closely cooperate with CISA as well. They take every single piece of information and they try to elevate, they try to investigate, they go deeper, and their advisories are just perfect for everyone. So I highly recommend to follow their advisories.
Yeah, no, those are all great sources. And I know in CTI and cyber defense, we love our Venn diagrams. And there's a very nice Venn diagram with geopolitical, physical, and cyber. And just shameless plug for Data for cyber defense, we have 100 specialized AI models designed specifically to gather this sort of multimodal intelligence. So things for leak sites, hacker forums, social media, P2P stuff like Telegram and Signal. And all of that is coordinated between those three elements. Like we are in the White House Situation Room on screen. The NATO Supreme Allied Commander Alexis somebody said that we are basically essential for their operations because we are detecting things like those convergences days ahead of other sources. So shameless plug, worth checking out.
Awesome. Thank you. And so going a little bit, this is back to something I think, Eric, you said on your last answer, but I'm going to pivot it a little bit to here. But we did get a question about, you mentioned threat modeling and how important it is to do that threat modeling, and especially continuous threat modeling. So is that something, the specific question was like, how do you do that? Is it interview based? Is it agent based? And then I'll add a little follow-up for me, which is, how do you adjust that threat model to account for something like a geopolitical conflict that you maybe did not expect to be a target for?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first, I would say like first you have to be a little bit lucky in the sense that your business has to be aligned on cyber risk being a major issue, and unfortunately, not every company in the world is aligned on this, right? Like if your CEO and your board just doesn't think cybersecurity is a huge problem, then you're kind of out of luck to begin with. But I'm gonna, for the sake of this, assume that your CEO and your board are on board with this. My first recommendation is like you should align the whole executive team. It's not just a cybersecurity function, right? If there is a data breach, it's going to affect everybody. It's not just going to affect cybersecurity. So you really need to get like your executive stakeholders aligned. You ideally should be having regular meetings with executive stakeholders on what are the threats for organization. There's quite a bit of process documentation on building good threat models. I would generally avoid asking ChatGPT for now, maybe in a year or two. But there's quite a bit of good documentation on like sitting down with executive stakeholders, gaming out different threats, understanding how the threat landscape is changing. And it's a bit of a two-way dialogue, right? Like this threat intelligence and security has to educate other executive stakeholders on what the threats are, and then get feedback from those people until everybody kind of reaches a consensus. And then taking that and updating it on a regular cadence based on the threats that your organization faces. And it's a little bit different for everybody. If you're like a small logistics company in the Midwest United States, the chances of you being hacked by Iran are probably fairly low. So I don't know that you need to have an update to your threat model based on the Iran conflict versus, if you're a Fortune 50 bank in the United States, you're probably at a lot more risk, or Canada or any other Western European country. So it really depends on the specific organization. And then making sure within the security team, you're updating your threat model based on like the latest adversary tactics, techniques, and procedures. If there's a rise in session takeovers, if there's a rise in vulnerability exploitation using open source language models, it really depends, and we're in a really, really fast moving landscape. And so there's a broader executive threat model you need. What are the threats to your organization? And then there's a more specific cybersecurity and threat intel team model that you should be using that's a subset of that. That's really focused on the most recent and latest threats, and was specifically how cyber criminals, ransomware groups, et cetera, are attacking companies.
Are there any specific technologies that you use to do this as well? Or is it kind of just, and you mentioned there were several different methodologies out there.
Yeah, I don't know of, besides ChatGPT, I don't know that I would recommend a specific technology for threat modeling. But I do think that there's a lot of technologies, for example, threat intelligence platforms, and just like broader threat intelligence solutions that can be used for understanding the threats to your organization and even understanding the historical version of those threats. How many the credentials have we had? How many session takeovers have we had? How many Stealer logs have exposed corporate information out there, are threat actors setting up lookalike domains. And so there's kind of an operational aspect that can definitely feed into the overall model. But for the modeling, I don't know that I would have a single platform to recommend.
Yeah. And as far as, we had the follow-up question, once you've gotten the management buy-in, how do you actually do the threat modeling? I think that is one of those places where the survey kind of called out that there is this room for gathering a lot more internal data and incorporating that into your CTI processes. I'd say the first thing to do is to look at past incidents and say what has impacted us in the past. Yep. And then also compare that to the external threat landscape of what can we expect to see in the future. All right, so we are almost at time. I just real quick, did any of you have anything else? I think to talk specifically around threat modeling. Yeah, Dan, go ahead.
Oh, no, just a real quick shameless plug, and I wish I'd pulled in Eric and put a QR code in my presentation. We have a new ebook out. You can't see it because of the video, but it's called Mending the Broken Cyber Defense Chain. And it's really all about what we've been talking about. How do we go from the threat landscape to your security posture to business impact? And again, it's about CTI winning that battle to demonstrate the impact. It's mostly tradecraft. It talks about that new Gartner model, Unified Cyber Risk Intelligence. There's only a few pages of vendor pitch, I promise. It does have a forward from someone I think we all know, Jen Miller Osborne, co-creator of MITRE ATT&CK. Really great read, and I think hits on a lot of the themes that we've talked about and that came up in the survey today. So Mending the Broken Cyber Defense Chain, come check it out. It's full color, quick read.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. I think we had one more question about, are the survey results available for download? Yes, they are. I know Carol shared the link to the white paper earlier on. My copy paste is not working from the chat, unfortunately. But we can get that link over to you, Mark. But thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to all the speakers for providing your insight as well. And hopefully you can check out the full paper. It has a lot of information. And I think that specifically a lot of the recommendations, a lot of discussion topics we've had throughout our speakers, you can get additional insight into both what we're seeing and then think back onto ways that you can apply these in your organizations.